It's streaming now.
You're fine.
Is that even getting slower?
About a minute.
You got a minute.
Yeah. It just takes us a moment to get this out of the way. There. Is David?
He didn't indicate he wasn't.
I haven't gotten anything either, I don't think.
I don't have any messages for him.
I don't have any messages either.
Do you want one? No, I'm good.
I'll be right back. I'll do it.
If I start encroaching, just give me the elbow.
I won't care. As long as you're free to do whatever you need to do. Hey, Brad.
Gosh, June 11:30.
Yeah, I know.
I know what it is. I printed it.
How that happens? Yeah.
I don't think they do either, really. You seem pretty efficient.
Hi.
Okay. Great. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. This is the June 11th City of Englewood City Council study session, and we have a full council tonight. Before we begin our first item on the agenda, I would like to ask if we'd like to have any reseating, since we have a change in Mayor Pro Tem, and we have a new member, Nathaniel Sierra. Welcome again.
Thank you.
I would like to say that Mayor Pro Tem would have the first option to pick a seat. If you're fine where you are, great. Then the next, who would be the most senior, would be Councilmember Martinez and Councilmember Barentine. Are you
I'm fine right
okay
here.
where you are?
I'm fine.
You are too? Okay. And the three of you, any
Works.
shifts you would like to make?
I
Okay.
like to move, so.
You like the what?
Unless you're sitting
I
on
don't like
somebody's
this
lap, you're a little out of
Right,
luck, my
exactly.
friend.
All right, great. That's great.
Mayor
Our-
Olson?
Yes.
I would like to sit there, actually.
Yeah, you would? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Then the more senior gets to choose a seat. So go ahead and pick up your pieces and then just shift. Is there anybody else who would like to make a change?
Well, now I want to sit next
Well, you already said no.
Well, I'll sit next to the city manager.
Well, I think she
I
just
didn't
said
want
she
to,
wanted to.
I didn't want to go ahead and disturb
Councilmember
him.
Barentine, she just said that, and you said you didn't want to change.
Well, I didn't want to kick our new member out from this spot.
So she asked before you did. Maybe you two can negotiate going back and forth every week. Oh, I'm sorry. She did just. I'm sorry. She is senior. She's been on for 2 years, and you have not been, so she does get priority.
That's
I was
6.
sorry. That was my mistake. So, but you did say you didn't want to be there. You didn't want to move. So, okay, that's it. We're fine with switching. So you're just going to swap.
Moving over one.
Yeah.
I had you still want to switch though?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I get for opening my mouth, right?
Well, I already said I wouldn't have kicked him out.
Well, then
That's
she
where he
would.
picked. But
She
if
would
he's
prefer.
going to give it up, then I'll be
Oh
more
my
than happy to
goodness.
move. That's fine. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. On to the first agenda item: board and commission appointment deliberation. So we have a list of new appointments that need to be made, and we did our interviewing last Tuesday night. I wonder if the best way to go about this, since we have such a small group tonight, would simply to begin with ACE and find out what everyone's perspective is on who their best choice is. So, Council, who would you like to put in for ACE? I think
have
the only
Ryan
one,
Simpson.
right? Ryan Simpson. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
All right. You okay?
Yes, all right. My name,
The second one is Code Enforcement
do.
Advisory Committee.
I think
Here.
Gail Ogden seemed the strongest.
I put Colleen for the regular member.
Yeah, I put her
and
for
Gail Ogden
alternate.
as the alternate.
Yeah, good. So,
I had them both listed as well, so I'm open to either.
yeah.
Any others?
For which one are you doing first?
We already did ACE. We're on to Code Enforcement Advisory. ACE, the only one really was Ryan Simpson. So, Councilmember Cuesta.
I had Ms. Moore as my primary choice as well.
I had Gail Ogden as my first choice and Colleen Moore as my second, mostly because I think Gail had a very strong attitude and really wanting to be open-minded and careful. And I thought she had a very positive attitude, so I really enjoyed that. So I put her first and Colleen second.
I have Colleen Moore first and JJ second. I think that they've been very involved in issues that are going on, and I think they've both already worked a little bit with some people on the committee, and I think that that would be good moving forward.
Okay, so we have,
And I was unable to attend, so.
okay, so it really is the rest of us. Is that true for, you haven't listened to any
No,
of
I
them?
don't
Okay.
listen to them.
Okay, great. Thank you for being honest about that. So we have Gail Ogden, Colleen Moore, and JJ, and I'm sorry, I'm going to missay his name. Margiotto?
Just say it really fast.
Margiotto. Sounds like Ms. Ogden and Ms. Moore were the two top ones that were on everyone's, or most everyone's list. Are we okay with putting those two on?
It's a shame because I really
Works
would
for
like
me.
to have Gail be on Inglewood Housing Authority when we have an opening, but.
Actually, and that was her first choice, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for
There
fit,
wasn't an opening right now.
right.
Well, there was only an opening for a resident.
So let's just go around again. Councilmember Wink, do you have a first, second choice here?
First was Gail Ogden, and second was Colleen Moore for me.
Councilmember Martinez?
My first was Gail Ogden, and the alternate was Colleen Moore.
More Ogden.
Said
More Ogden.
Ogden Moore. Number
Going
nine,
with
it
Moore
would
and
be-
JJ. I wish Gail would give her expertise to EHA, but
So you did have Moore as your first choice?
I did.
So we have kind of a,
Councilmember Sierra, this is where we need you.
it sure is.
Apologies.
I'm not sure what to do on this. City Attorney, what do we do when we're kind of split on someone?
well, we're not voting.
We're not making a
You're not
decision
making
here,
the
but how would
decision
we put it forward?
tonight, but when it comes forward at that time, Mr. Sierra will be required to vote,
Okay.
and he'll be the tiebreaker.
Okay,
Might wanna
so we'll
listen.
need you to go back and listen to all of the
No, you
interviews. Great, thank you.
It's posted.
Yeah, you should be able to read it. Cultural Arts Commission. I had, let's start with you, Councilmember Barentine.
He only had one person that wanted to really
All right,
be
so
on it.
that's Brenda Hubka. Is that true for everyone?
I had Brenda Hubka, and then a possible alternate would be Catherine Pavoda, but she preferred the library board. So
All right.
I know she would be a really good fit for cultural arts, too.
Anyone else?
Shame.
I thought Brenda, I missed that part of it, but Brenda, knowing her and having listened to the rest of the meeting, I thought she was the best.
I had
Member Cresta, you had Brenda too?
Brenda as well, yes.
It's okay to shift some people around who said they were willing to do almost anything,
Right.
but great. Okay, so Brenda would be our first choice on the list, and then possibly Catherine Pavoda if she didn't want to do library. Let's move on. Englewood Housing Authority, there really is only one that was available and could do it, which was Joan McClendon. Same, okay. Historic Preservation Commission, we did not have anyone. Are there any folks that you heard that you thought we could ask if they'd be willing to do it?
let me look through my notes. One person said they were really interested in historic buildings. But I have a question with that group. Is that if we don't fill these two spots, is there any issues with quorum for them? Or not sure?
Yeah, there potentially will be a problem. And as you may have seen in the tentative topics agenda coming forward, their chairperson has put forth a memorandum to me requesting that council entertain an amendment to their enabling ordinance as well as their bylaws to allow the appointment of a youth member to the commission as well. That would take one of their slots. And so that's going to be discussed next Monday night at the study session. But I'm a little concerned about their ability to perform and hold a quorum.
Michael Chisholm was one of a few, as we mentioned before, who said he was pretty open to serving wherever he could benefit the city. I thought he might be better for Keep Englewood Beautiful, but he did. He was one of them that was pretty willing to be flexible.
Others of you that thought about options or?
Brenda Hubka also mentioned that she likes Englewood history and heritage, but I don't think she's expressed particular interest in that group. She did say she would also be interested in library, but I think she would be a good fit for any.
What if we were to come back to it if we can't make a decision now? If everyone's spoken, but if they haven't, then I'll be quiet. But
Let's hold that one open.
just in case we can't get to a decision
Anybody else
now,
want to?
maybe we can see what happens at the end.
Let's hold it open for now then. Keep Englewood Beautiful. There was one person who asked for it. It was Michael Chisholm.
I had him for that.
Yeah.
Did anyone
Yeah,
exchange
yeah.
it with anyone? No?
I had it.
Okay, right. Parks and Recreation, we had no youth applications, so that one's free. Public Library Board,
Bathroom. Pavoda.
and request you have,
Yes.
or, yeah,
Yeah.
Pavoda.
I had the same.
Same.
And that is a case where if we put her in, which I also had her down, we still have 2 openings. Can the library board meet? Will they have a quorum with only 1?
That I'm not certain of, Mayor. That's something I'm going to have to check in with our, to see the attendance of how the other members are shaping up.
Right, we have those open. And then Transportation Advisory Committee, we have an alternate member.
Ben
Frederick
Olet.
Olet.
I had the same.
Seemed pretty perfect for it.
And the final is the Urban Renewal Authority.
Justin Whip.
I had Justin Whip.
I had Mike Jones.
Requested. Whip. Okay. I had Mr. Whip as well.
I think neither one of them truly understand the role that that's playing for urban renewal, so they both need kind of an education. They might be somewhat disappointed if they find out the actual.
Did you have a preference?
No. I think they're equally going to be surprised that they are not going to be replanning the city.
Yeah, I do agree that there was a misinformation or misunderstanding of what that particular commission might be, or the authority.
Well, that's pretty common.
It is common, isn't it? So it sounds as if Justin Whip was the preferred member or applicant for that. All right. Which then, going back to the Historic Preservation Commission.
Maybe Mike Jones. I don't know if Mike would be interested in that, but he has a lot to offer and has
I actually think I think you're right.
Does
I
that
think
count?
some of the comments he made, that
Yeah.
might be a good fit.
Yeah, he's really strong, and I think he'd be a good steward for that group. I just think it would be a good mix and good forward thinking and planning.
All right, there's a suggestion for Mike Jones. What about the other members?
I agree with
I would support that.
Councilmember.
All right, so then we look back down to the Public Library Board. So we do have 2 then, Michael Chisholm and Mike Jones for Historic Preservation. Then back down to the Library Board concerning getting a quorum there. Are there any other folks that you can think of that we might rearrange?
A point of, I have a question here. Are we just moving Michael from Keep Englewood Beautiful to the Historic? Is that what you were doing?
Oh,
Yeah, Chisholm's on Keeping with
I
You.
think
he is
he was a good
unequal,
fit for
sorry.
Keeping with Beautiful.
Sorry, we have one Mike. Yeah, I had him on both in my list as possible because he was willing to be anywhere. No, it would be Michael. I think Mike asked for his first choice was Keep Englewood Beautiful, although he did say he would go either way. But if we put Mike Jones in there, then we have 1 in
So are
Historic.
you, I still don't
Yeah,
understand.
Michael
So-
Chisholm would still be in Keep Englewood Beautiful.
Oh, okay, thank you for clarification.
And as I recall, unless I missed something in the earlier group, no one really indicated a real desire to serve on more than one, did they?
We didn't really ask
We
this
didn't
time. However,
Is
it's a
that an option?
possibility.
So,
Brenda Hubka did mention that she leads a book club at the library, and she frequents the library quite a bit, so I don't know if she would be interested in that at all. Let me see who else mentioned the library.
Cultural library.
point of information, I didn't know we were going to go down the road again of doubling people up when we had already done this conversation several times.
We've actually not set a policy that would not allow for it, and when those are not quasi-judicial.
But we've had a lot of discussion, and we need to be consistent on what we're doing because we've had people get off of boards in order to be consistent with that they weren't serving on more than one, and I think that that's currently the case now because of the conversations council has had. So I would rather have a conversation and either set to policy or not set to policy, but I don't think this is the proper place to go setting what we've put into place because we've had people leave boards.
I agree.
Attorney McKinney-Brown, are you able to weigh in on whether we set a policy yet really or not and whether we can do this?
This is totally a decision of the governing body. I don't think it's a legal matter whatsoever. It's whatever your preference is as a governing body.
I would
Okay,
suggest that we not change our
point
preference
of order.
every time
I'd like
we
to
do
ask
this.
that we use the talking sticks now. I think it's going to get a little crazy. So let's hear from people on what their view is of allowing for people to serve on more than one at a point when it's underneath, I think it's underneath your name tag.
Now that it's getting crazy.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I'm fine with kind of trying to keep with folks serving on one board or commission. My only concern with that is when we run into situations where we don't have enough members to have a quorum. I don't want to hinder forward progress with any of the boards and commissions because they don't have enough folks.
So in terms of tonight, are you willing to put a person on a second one then?
I would be willing to.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I actually think that we are inviting problems because we did ask people to make decisions, and if we turn our decision now, I think it's important for us to make sure that we solicit applications for the board. I'm not sure that any of these boards are, I think some of these boards have been without members for a while. But I really do not want to change in midstream tonight because we didn't have enough applicants.
Member Valentine?
Again, I'm going to state I think this isn't an appropriate place to make this decision. If we were going to allow this now after we went ahead and had people give up their other boards, then we should have told people who are already on boards and commissions and they didn't have an opportunity to go ahead and say that they would like to sit on a second board. I would like to see some consistency with this council and not just making, it just seems kind of knee-jerk. So if we're going to do that, then we've been very unfair to the people who are currently sitting on a board or commission because they didn't know they could apply for a second one because that's been the rule for, I don't know, well over a year and a half now. So to change it in this setting like this with no notification makes it unfair to the people who could be already sitting on a board or commission who might want to. And it's limiting that opportunity only to these people who have applied this time. It's not consistent. I don't think that's very fair.
Thank you, Councilmember Valentine. Anyone else? Councilmember Cuesta?
I would agree that at this point in time, this might not be the appropriate forum to make that decision. However, I would certainly be open to the idea of people serving on more than one board. If somebody has the desire to do so and competent and can make two meetings, I certainly think we should allow them to. But probably a discussion not for
Thank you. I do think that we have asked people to get off of boards when they were sitting on a quasi-judicial board, and that's when we have done it. We might have one right now who is on two boards. I'm not sure if Mr. Moore is or not, if it's on Water and Sewer Board and pension. At one point he was, but maybe he is off of one of the pensions now. But at what point will we decide this so that these few boards can be fixed? Do you want to do a mid-year ask for submissions like we did with someone else recently and let them come on mid-year? Councilmember Valentine?
The council decided prior to the last round before the applications went out, somebody could sit on a pension board along with anything else, had nothing to do with quasi-judicial board. We made a decision and had people get off of those boards if they were on more than two. And the reason for that was that at one time we had certain people, usually some kind of ex-council person or somebody who'd been in the city for a long time, sitting up to as many as 4 boards. And then when we had a lot of people who wanted to participate, they didn't have the opportunity. So I know you're going to have some lean periods occasionally, but hopefully that prompts us to get people out there to apply for these when we have those issues, because it looked very good old boyish to just have certain people sitting on 3-4 boards, and that's what it took 2 years to go ahead and get that pared down. And I think that to just changes like this is kind of haphazard. So, but we did, because of the pension boards usually meeting during the day, allowed for that.
Manager Keck, did you see anything?
Yeah, Mr. Moore is on 2 boards. He is on the NERP, the non-emergency retirement, as well as water and sewer. But I do recall the conversation being, as Councilmember Barentine has raised, and that is you were having such difficulty getting people for retirement boards that you said you can serve on multiple boards, maybe even multiple pension boards.
Right.
We still need pension people for the future, so put a plug in if you like pensions. Apply.
All right, thank you. It sounds like we're sort of at an impasse with this one as well, so I think it means that we don't go forward with anything different than what we've been practicing in the past. So we'll leave
Can I
these
ask for
open.
Just one point of information.
Yes.
We had too many people apply last time, and I think the time maybe before that. Is it possible to notify the people that maybe didn't get placed on boards and commissions? Since they've already been interviewed, maybe that would be a way to...
You mean as a process every time?
Yeah, as a process. To
I think that's a good idea.
While I'm sad that this time with the summer we didn't have enough, we have had times when there's too many and maybe they think that there's not openings.
Right.
Maybe some board they wanted actually came open. Maybe we can have a notification.
Okay, great. Let me summarize what I think we have sort of agreed to put forward next Monday, which is ACE is Ryan Simpson. Code is Colleen Moore as number 1 or 2, and Gail Ogden as number 1 or 2, which our newest member will help us decide at that point. But both are being put forward. Cultural Arts Commission, we have Brenda Hubka. We have an offer of asking Catherine Pravoda, but that has been just turned down, right? So we are not going to ask for a second person to be on a second. And then Englewood Housing Authority, Joan McClender. Historic Preservation.
No, he's not on the... Oh, Joan. Okay. I thought we skipped one, sorry. Should put my glasses on.
Historic Preservation Commission. We are going to ask Mike Jones if he'd be willing to do that.
I'll call him.
Okay. And then Keep Englewood Beautiful, Michael Chisholm. Parks and Rec is left open. They're only youth members. And Public Library Board is Catherine Pavoda. And although Brenda Hubka would be great, we don't want to add a second one to her plate. Transportation Advisory Committee is Frederick Olette, and Urban Renewal Authority, Justin Whip. Does that make sense? Great. All right. Agenda item number 2 is the introduction to City Center redevelopment challenges and opportunities. It's an informational piece tonight. And here to help us, Mr. Brad Powers, Dan Paremba. Thank you. I do have a presentation.
Bless you.
Sorry.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Before we get started on this agenda item, I just wanted to provide a few introductory remarks relative to who is presenting to you this evening. I know some of you have met Dan Paremba. He's been with us about 4 months. He serves as our Redevelopment Officer, and I just wanted to formally introduce him because this is his first opportunity to present to all of you on a topic of great importance to the future of the community. Dan comes to us with a vast resources in real estate development in both the public and private sectors, and so I think we're very fortunate to have somebody of his skill level working with us through some of the key issues relative to some of the real estate challenges and opportunities that we have in the community. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Dan, and he will proceed.
Thanks, Brad. Mayor, Council, it's nice to be here tonight. Hopefully this is the first of many discussions on some interesting real estate and redevelopment topics we have coming up. And I won't bore you with any of my background, but that may come out along the way as we discuss some things related to public-private partnerships and ground leases and things like that relate to the city center going forward plan. So I wanted to give you an update, starting with some of the early history of the city center, and that will come into play as we look at what's going on right now with the Miller Weingarten foreclosure and how that impacts the going forward plan. Just some summary points. 55-acre city center now includes over 800,000 square feet of development, 438 residential units in the Art Walk project primarily, 330,000 square feet of retail, and 150,000 square feet of office, which includes this building. Miller Weingarten was the retail master developer. Trammell Crow developed the apartments. Walmart was the big box retailer that really provided the sales tax generator, and then RTD funded development of the Inglewood Station and related improvements. One of the key facts is that the city, through the Inglewood Environmental Foundation, provided a 75-year ground lease to Weingarten. So there's now 57 years remaining on that lease, and that'll be one of the key factors going forward. There were outright sales of land to Trammell Crow and Walmart. The Foley's department store was redeveloped as the building we're in, the Inglewood Civic Center building. The Inglewood funding was covered by $21.5 million in COP bonds for land development and the redevelopment of this building. Those payments run out in the foreseeable future, and they'll be retired completely in 2023. Right now, that obligation for the rent and related payment is about $1.5 million a year. EAF, as you know, serves as the land property manager for all of the common area property and collects common area maintenance charges from each of the property owners. So now we get to the exciting part. In late 2017, Weingarten Realty defaulted on their repayment of $33 million in debt to their lender. They had a balloon payment that came due in November. They had no liability for walking away, and they decided to walk away. The reason for that is really, and we'll talk about it, is kind of a declining performance of the retail assets, combined with the fact that to really reposition the assets, they would have to put a lot more capital in to the project. So the additional projected capital on top of the existing debt just really made it an infeasible challenge for them, and it was easier for them to walk away. Currently, the Arapahoe County Public Trustee sale is scheduled for, it's actually June 20th. There have been multiple delays, and when I first put this together, it was actually June 6th, but it's now June 20th. The Weingarten property itself includes about 200,000 square feet, 203,000 square feet of retail, and some office space, generally on about 12 acres. Their big tenants are Ross, 24-Hour Fitness, Office Depot, Harbor Freight Tools, and Petco. The company that's managing the debt bondholders is a special servicer called C3 Asset Management out of Dallas. They're expected to take title to the property on the 20th or whenever that final sale occurs. Probably the big point here is that this foreclosure really can be an advantageous development for Inglewood, because it can probably and will probably likely open the door to renegotiation of the original ground lease in connection with a retail redevelopment plan for City Center. So in effect, the foreclosure gets a early look at a renegotiation that allows the city to kind of take into account what's happening in the retail world and the fact that many of the junior box retailers that are in the city center retail space are being so impacted by our online market these days. Here you'll see the outline, the general outline of the 55 acres that comprise the city center PUD area. And then you'll see in red, in this red overlay, the land that and buildings that constitute the Weingarten property. And it's significant. Even though they're on about 12 acres, that's primarily the land that's under the footprint of their buildings. So by the time you include the associated space for parking, it ends up being a bigger total percentage of city center than you might imagine. The question, and this will have various iterations, why explore city center redevelopment now? I think the immediate answer is to preempt the cycle of a fading retail area originally developed with a very, very large sea of parking that's now underutilized. There's an encouraging window of opportunity to plan for the redevelopment of the retail space, and as we look at some possibilities for bringing in or working with new parties, some of those parties are going to be very interested in other redevelopment opportunities within the city center district. So that could be very advantageous for the city as well. I already mentioned that the foreclosure creates an early opportunity for the city to explore a redevelopment plan and some possible amendments to that ground lease. One of the things we have going for us right now, in addition to general market conditions, is that there's very, very strong market interest in public-private partnerships to facilitate the kinds of mixed-use, transit-oriented development that we have here. And as you probably are aware, transit-oriented development has really caught on in the years since City Center was, in essence, the first transit-oriented development in our city, in our region. So there's huge interest these days, not only from national developers and investors, but from many, many international parties as well. So the benefits of city center redevelopment are that it avoids potentially the negative long-term impacts of a downward trending retail center, and it would potentially allow more attractive, vibrant, and sustainable Inglewood commercial core to be developed and to be tied into South Broadway and the hospital district. I think financially it would allow for increases in sales and property taxes, and if we're fortunate enough to get creative, which I think we probably will, it would allow for additional potential revenues as well as a decrease in financial risk to the city and its entity, EAF. I think it would also provide the opportunity to attract new employers and residents to the city. Our preliminary redevelopment explorations, just to bring you up to speed on what we've been doing within the Community Development Department, is just continuing day-to-day discussions with Weingarten, C3 Asset Management, the Arapahoe County Public Trustee, and EAF's attorney. We have continued to evaluate and prioritize the recommendations of the Urban Land Institute, Healthy Corridors panel recommendations, and many of those will come into play as we start to look at alternatives for the future of City Center. One of the things I meant to mention is that there's been a kind of a key piece of City Center that's been in limbo for a while, and that's the retail that was originally called the Piazza Retail, which is the 16,000 square feet of retail in the Art Walk Western building. That's owned by Weingarten, and Weingarten and C3 have been debating between themselves as to who's going to end up with the ownership of that space. As you know, it's really It's really high-profile space that's gone grossly underutilized, underleased for many, many years now. And I think one of the things that will happen coming out of the foreclosure is that somebody will end up controlling that space, and probably in a way that we, the city, can collaborate with them in ways to really activate that space for the benefit of Inglewood companies and artists, et cetera. So that's an ongoing discussion. We've let both Weingarten and C3 know that that's really important to the city to see an activation of that space, and we've told them that we really, in the short run, just want to see it paid some attention to. There are some blinds hanging down in there, and it's gone kind of unattended, and we'd like to see it fixed up a little bit, particularly in conjunction with the city's summer concert series. So we've started, I'll get back here to these points, we've started looking at the possible formation of a property owners group to collaborate in and co-fund a planning effort. And that could, in addition to the city center's area itself, also include property owners to the south, across Hampton, and to the east. We've started interviewing and having discussions regarding scope and fee with planning and architectural firms so that we could have somebody on board at the point that C3 gains title to the property, and we can have some meaningful conversations about the future. And then our plan, very simply, is just to return to you at various points as we have alternatives, more or less more defined for your review and direction as we then go forward with subsequent phases. So this is primarily just informational to let you know what's been going on as the Weingarten foreclosure sale has moved through now many, many delays. But I think we're coming to the point where we'll actually see title transfer in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Paremba. Are there questions? As he's suggested, this is an informational time, so please feel free to ask questions. Councilmember Wink?
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Paremba, for your detail. So the slides didn't have numbers. I'm going to try
Is
and
the sound loud enough?
So
Maybe.
Okay, Doug, thank you. So back about 4 slides, you mentioned the foreclosure. It was the slide titled something about the foreclosure piece, probably that one. And you talk about may open door to renegotiation. So I just wondered if I could have a little bit more information in terms of what moves that statement from may opens door to does open the door to the renegotiation. Like what has to happen there?
That's a good question. I think if you look at it from the perspective of a potential buyer of the Weingarten assets, which include those particular buildings and the ground lease, the thought process is going to be that 57 years is really not a very long, although it seems...
remaining from the 70-something.
Although it seems really long to us from a commercial investment perspective, it's really not very long. And so the starting point would be that they would want to extend it back to at least the 75, and there's a good chance they would want to go longer with that. They would also want to contemplate a redevelopment of the property that would allow them to move it away from its current format as this junior box retail, and they would more than likely want to see some mix of uses. You know, and that could be office, it could be hotel. We have an obvious hotel opportunity. It could be some more residential that's in close proximity to the station. So all those things would very likely be brought up by somebody who would be looking to step in. But it really starts with the length of the lease term.
The lease term. Thank you, Dan. And then let's see. When you mentioned a couple of slides later about community development engaging proactively with the involved parties, I'm probably I'm just wondering what that looks like. It looks like not that slide, but but you were mentioning pre quote unquote engaging proactively with the involved parties as you move forward?
Yeah, I think it's this one. Really, at this point, until the title transfers, it's really kind of a hand-holding exercise, and from a legal perspective, just making sure that we're protecting as much as possible the interests of the city and EAF.
Yep.
But really, title has to transfer, and we have very little to do with that until it actually does.
Happens. Thanks, Dan. I think I might have one quick follow-up. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Do you feel that we could benefit from additional innovative ideas, additional to what the Healthy Corridors piece that we have, from in terms of fresh business investment, by adding something to the way we're currently publicizing the available spaces for lease? My mind is just thinking, and some constituents say things, and I just wonder.
I think what happens is whoever invests in the real estate, they're going to have a lot of capital at stake, and they will want to bring a new energy to what they're doing in terms of both releasing current space and redeveloping new assets, new uses, and I think it'll be one of those things that can really reinvigorate the whole area.
I agree.
Because Weingarten has kind of, as a practical matter, run their course, and so we need some new energy and new creativity, and part of what we're doing also is looking at some collective planning effort that will start to put those ideas, in play, at least for the city, to identify what are the best alternatives from the city's perspective.
Good. Thanks, Mr.
Yeah.
President. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
Thank you. Congratulations. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to be here. I think one of the things that attracted me to the opportunity was that I just think it's such a unique situation to have an opportunity for a first-tier suburban city to redevelop its TOD and to have as much now land to work with in terms of the parking as we have here. I think it's really going to be a fascinating opportunity that we have to.
It was exciting 18 years ago.
Yeah.
But when they planned it 18 years ago, they didn't think they were going to be replanning it, or that they would have the problems or difficulties that they had. The excitement was being one of the first TOD projects, and we have had the Urban Land Institute involved when it was originally done. And then 5 years later, the Urban Land Institute came in and said that it was actually foolish. So I realize those are different people on there. And I think I can find that CD where they did that, because they criticized 5 years later that the opening, the gateway to it was pushed back off of Hampton, that we didn't have the access for Hampton for the traffic that we've got there. The lack of use for the tremendous amount of parking in the back, where you don't have that feel for it, so we still have places that have never been leased here. So there were a lot of mistakes that were made, and I would really like to go ahead if we have this opportunity, because one of the problems was that land lease that you mentioned. And I have always been told that the land lease was the problem because it was between so many different entities, and we have and who owns the building. And now if we do have an opportunity to kind of garner some of that under a little bit better umbrella of control for us, then I really would suggest that the collaborative planning include the citizens and this council a little bit more, because I kind of feel like it's moving a little forward without that kind of input from this council as representatives for the community and for the community itself. The Healthy Corridors was a good study, and I think that it got a lot of good information, but if we're going to redo City Center, I kind of want to make sure we've got a little bit more public information going out there, so people don't think it's all of a sudden, we're redoing it, and here's what happened, and could we get a copy of the lease agreements with some information on exactly what you think the possible amendments would be to it that would be advantageous to us, and why it would be advantageous. And you mentioned that the ground lease in connection, especially with retail, and You also said that you have already started interviewing to have something on board, so when C3 comes through, and I'd like to know what that process looks like and what's involved with that, so that this body is aware of what's going on so that we can get that out to our constituency. And exactly, at some point, I would really like to see a presentation where you show a little bit more. Like, so when you're talking about the 16,000 feet of art space and you go, we want to help artists and participate and it's underutilized. But I think for everybody within the context of the conversation and the presentation, to have something up there, or at least for us to maybe take a field trip or do something so that we know the area that you're talking about little better, and the public knows.
We can look out the window or go right across the street.
Right.
Yeah.
But the names get all kind of a little muddled sometimes with what we're doing, so that we could connect that conversation with something, that people can kind of see and touch a little. And exactly what will our role be when we get the information for the lease, exactly what our role is as EAF, or the role of EAF under the Certificate of Participation, the debt that we are still paying until 2023, how much authority we have between now and 2023, and how much we will lose after 2023 if EAF is no longer in that role, or how will we negotiate that so that what kind of control we have.
Yeah, I think all those things are to be determined. And a lot of this is just talking about the most likely path ahead, but until C3 actually gets title to the property and can legally talk to us without lender liability issues, we're just not going to know that much. But we're preparing, we're taking steps to prepare for what we think are the likely conversations. The only other thing I'll say, based on 30 years of development and work on many, many different TODs in different areas, I would actually say that this plan, when it was done, was probably the most perfect plan that could be done at the time with what was known. It was a TOD, science was a whole new thing, and the city went through actually a very collaborative evolution in terms of all the things that were looked at. That plan changed considerably in response to market conditions that changed over a 5-year period. And further, the planning of the site was done in such a way that it's actually quite flexible in terms of running the original streets back through the site. And so all that was taken into consideration. So the idea that it was a mistake, I would, just from a personal perspective, I would probably not agree with that.
You'd have to take that up with the Urban Land Institute people that made the presentation. I guess what I was asking for was the copy of the lease, where you see we could have possible amendments, and what possible negotiation strategies we might have, regardless of who ends up owning it, and the presentation to include some kind of visual on the spaces you're talking about, and the TOD, why you think TODs, because TODs are having a lot of problems now, just like they did when we first started. And you're right, we are innovators, and 20/20 hindsight is always different, but we're recognizing some of the problems now. Would I be able to get those things so that we could have a little bit more information?
Well, the lease is certainly easy. The likely amendments are what I've already outlined, which is an extension of the lease and an amendment of the land plan, which would allow for other uses. Probably there's not a heck of a lot more beyond that.
That'll just help when I'm seeing the lease, and you could kind of show me, because what I'm trying to avoid is what City Manager Keck brought up with the original concern about this building, is that we wish we had more control. There were too many owners, and this seems to give us an opportunity to resolve some of those issues. That's what I would like to address, because it's been brought up several times by our city manager.
We can get that copy of that lease.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Barentine. So all of those are doable to some extent at this point. Some are more readily done than others because not everything's settled yet.
Right.
Oh, I had just one more question. Quickly, in the next presentation, could you please just address why it would address the long-term negative impact of downward sales tax trends, and then also in the same slide it said we would increase sales tax. So if in the next time you come back, if you could kind of say how we could combat negative sales tax trends, and one of the benefits is we're going to increase it, maybe we could get a little more information. That was the only other thing.
Thank you, Member Bernstein. Those are great questions, and we look forward. I'm very excited that this has gotten it's going to get some looking at this point. It's been really rough to just sit and wait and wait and wait. So thank you, and I'm glad to see you aboard on this. So
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, I did not see you.
That's okay. The question that I have is how much legal authority does this council actually have, or the city actually have over this?
Good question.
Since Eve is still in control.
I have been visiting with the attorney for Eve because what I would like to be able to do is get a discussion on scope of Eve's authority. This council does have at least limited authority, but if you ask me more than that at this point, I really can't tell you. We have been we have been in discussions to try to get some of that in writing, because at this point, it's turning into urban legend almost with what we can't do and what we can't do. I would just like something in writing to provide to you. So just to let you know, the moment Dan came on board, he started pushing to get some of that going, and based on his input, Eve's attorney and I have been visiting.
Just to piggyback on that, do you have a timeline for how long that might take?
I would like it sooner.
We all would.
No, I don't have a timeline. I'm pushing to get that out as soon as we possibly can. If I could have that to you this summer, I would feel like it was a win.
Oh, that'd be great. Member Sierra and then Member Cuesta. I don't know which was first. So,
I know we're only talking about Weingarten at the moment, but is there any other risk to the city for any other property owners that aren't making their mortgage payments?
Not that we're aware of, no. They just had a very unusual loan in that it had a balloon payment, and there was no penalty to them. There was no liability for walking away.
In fact, the residential component of the project was sold last year to a major institutional investor, and it was one of the highest per square foot sales in the entire metro area last year. So the residential has been very successful lately.
Point of information, who was the contract with that Weingarten made?
Could you say that a little bit louder, Member?
Who was the contract with that Weingarten made?
The loan
Who was the
agreement?
$33 million contract made with?
It was a commercial mortgage-backed security, which is one of the interesting aspects, and it was financed by basically bond investors.
So the city had nothing to do
No,
with that
no.
piece of it? Okay,
They were
thanks.
not at risk in any way for that.
No, I just asked, did we have anything to do with that contract piece of it?
No.
We didn't. Okay.
Member Sierra, are you finished? Member Cuesta?
Good question. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the presentation tonight. With Weingarten walking away, do you have any more insight as to why they did that? You did mention that they weren't in a place to make those capital investments that would probably take to, I guess, assure a decent return on investment for them continuing to make those payments. Do you know what in particular it was that why they decided to make that decision? It is alarming to me that somebody would just walk on that property, especially when you mentioned that it should be valuable. Just recently had such a high per square footage price on it during that
On a
sale.
portion of it.
I'm
Not the
sorry.
retail portion, on the residential
Sure.
portion.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Well, and here's where you start getting into some speculation on the financial aspects. They had a relatively high basis in the property, and so when you take that high basis and then look at adding the additional investment required to reposition the property, the return would just be too small. And compared to the assets in their portfolio, this at 200,000 square feet, it is one of the smaller assets. They typically own much bigger shopping centers. And so one of the things, and we didn't specifically say this about the foreclosure, one of the opportunities it presents is that whoever steps in to buy the property will probably be paying something considerably less than the $33 million. So it lets them start with a much lower basis and then add the needed investment on top of it So for them, for the new owner, it becomes much more financially feasible than for Weingarten.
Thank you. As I'm looking at the zoning map now, that is MUB1, the mixed-use central business district. We are sitting here discussing what kind of influence can we have as council, what sort of authority does EEF hold. What is allowed by right? What could they buy that property right now and do where it'd be hands-off for us? I mean, to me, with the exception of the PUD, I'm curious how much influence we do have. Maybe they would need to renegotiate the ground lease, which could provide some leverage. But outside of that, I'm not seeing within their use by right what influence city council could have.
I would say this. I was looking through the ground lease today. The ground lease really kind of contemplated that the retail development plan that was put in place would stay in place for the term of the lease. And although it generally contemplates the possibility of some reconfiguration of the retail space in terms of additions and things like that, it didn't really contemplate a complete change of use on some of the property or new uses. And so that's one of the things that puts the city back in the, in a little bit of the driver's seat as it relates to what we think would be a likely request for amendments. The other thing that's important to note is that the way the ground lease was set up is it really is primarily to those areas that are directly below each building. So to change the ground lease, you really have to change kind of the description of the property that's being leased to expand it to allow either a reconfiguration or expansion of the current retail facilities.
Residential is allowed.
This area was actually, city center was actually done as a planned unit development originally.
A little blue square on the map. Thank you. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, very good. So and that's where I think the city would gain leverage. So there would have to be a PUD process if they decide.
Amendment, or actually a start over.
Okay.
If it's aggressive enough and the plan changes enough, we would essentially process a new application for that.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez?
Thanks for all this information. I was just going to ask a little bit more about the timing. So you said the sale is scheduled tentatively right now for the June 20th. After some delays, there's a potential that there could be more delays, right? And then what do we guesstimate that a time for, say it happens on the 20th and then they'll come and negotiate. What's the typical turnaround time for something like that? I mean, does it really depend on the amount and the depth of the amendments?
Yeah, it's really going to be at that point up to C3. And it starts getting really complicated because they owe a fiduciary duty to all of these bondholders, and all the bondholders are kind of involved at different tranches of the debt. And so the bondholders are all going to be looking at C3 to maximize their recovery. And so C3 is going to be in a position where it's going to be very difficult for them as a practical matter. This is the usual case to negotiate a quick sale. So there's a good possibility that C3 may be approaching the city to say, let's renegotiate the ground lease now and maximize the flexibility under the ground lease as a means for us to take the property to market and then maximize the recovery of the property. They may want to do that themselves as part of trying to maximize the marketability rather than that leaving that up to individual prospective property owners, and that would become, even on its own, a very time-consuming and burdensome, process.
All right, thank you.
All right, one more and then we'll close.
Who would they renegotiate the lease? You said if they might want to go ahead and do that prior to renegotiate that. Who would they do that with?
I think they would approach the city, and then at that point, we face collectively some of the legal questions about how the city and EEF collaborate in doing that. I think, in a general sense, the city has interests that extend beyond and are bigger than EEF. So, however it takes place, the city would be a party to that.
So it would be with the city, but if they wanted to do it prior, what would the timeline be for that you're talking about? Because if they're looking to potentially do that from the 57 back to 75 years, when would they want to have that in place?
We
Prior to the 20th?
No, prior to taking the property back out to the general marketplace
Should
for
be
sale.
about what time frame?
They've indicated just in passing to us that they're not in a huge hurry to get the property back out into the marketplace, which has kind of suggested to us that they are anticipating negotiating with the city and EAF before taking the market back to the
What is taking
This
your
wouldn't be a
time?
weeks-long process.
No,
This would
it-
be a months-long process.
Yeah.
Okay, months, that's,
Yes.
okay, but not years.
It could be a year.
Okay, but probably not, they're not
Yeah,
going to
not-
hold on to this for a long period of time?
No.
5 years?
No.
2 years?
No.
Probably somewhere between now and, okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you for the information and for your work on this. We look forward to seeing what happens.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks. All right, our next agenda item, number 3, 2019 to 2023 Capital Improvement Plan Overview. This is a direction and informational both tonight. We have an hour with Assistant Manager Woulf, when he'll be presenting to discuss this Capital Improvement Plan Overview. And again, we have another presentation, right? No,
Oh,
yeah, we do.
And I'll be joined by friends at various points of this evening. But my friends will have to bring their own chairs, it looks like, so when you're called up, bring their own chair. Good evening.
I
This?
think yours is on, or I'm sorry, with the,
No, not for this one. This one should be in the folder already.
your sound seems to be working well, but is everybody else's? I know I'm hearing this, so I just want to make sure I'm watching people go like that, so.
Oh, no.
That sounds, yours is good.
Ours is good.
Okay. I think this one's hidden a bit for you all, so maybe just, yeah.
We're loud enough.
We're fine. We're doing fine. Everybody can hear us.
You just know it's hard to hear if you listen online.
You have to give us feedback on how the board and commission, whether you heard it or not.
Yep.
Yeah, that one should be interesting.
All right. Good evening. So this continues our discussion about the 2019 budget. We are well in advance of the deadline for adoption so far, and we'll keep you updated on that as we approach. This continues our efforts with you to have a proactive conversation about the challenges for the 2019 budget that we'll face together, but we're certainly facing as we begin to put together the components of the 2019 budget. So beginning this evening, we'll be walking you through an overview of issues related to the capital budget, which we'll start on tonight, and then continuing on into our operating budget as well. I thought last year worked pretty well, where we highlighted some of the major policy issues that we were struggling with. It was an opportunity to at least put some things out there on your radar. Also gave us a chance to get a pulse of the council in certain areas, which allows Manager Keck to put together a budget that most matches your values, so that we have a nice collaborative process going into formal adoption of the capital budget. So following that vein, especially for our newer members, the sessions here in June will really to focus on those major policy issues that either we're struggling with internally to figure out how to answer. There are policy issues that we know council will have to weigh in at some point, if not tonight or on the 25th of June, if nothing else, to begin that dialogue on those major issues. So you'll get an overview from a number of our departments, our directors on those issues, beginning this evening, starting with our capital budget. We'll then continue on into the operating budget. Tonight we'll focus on reliable infrastructure and community parks, so trying to move in a parallel process as you all. We have oriented ourselves internally by teams, and those teams were organized around our former 8, or yes, current 8 community-wide goals. And so We combined those into what we thought were related goals. We had 4 different teams and then a 5th working on the capital improvement plan. We won't be presenting by those teams per se because we're trying to show you what it looks like if we were to continue the budget process based on the goals that you all have identified. So you'll hear those themes throughout. Point being is just a way to organize the budget around goals so the community knows what we're talking about and how we're trying to hit those outcomes. So you'll hear those themes throughout. You'll hear those specifically around our operating programs. We're starting tonight on the capital side because we've spent so much time talking to you about the challenges as it relates to putting together a capital budget with our limited capital funding that we have available. So we'll go through some of those challenges tonight, hit the first operating goal area, and then continue the discussion on the 25th of June. In August, you will get a more detailed version of the 2019 proposed budget, and again by capital and operating programs. All right? So starting off with the 5-year capital improvement plan, just wanted to take a quick second, really from an education standpoint, and saying, why do we talk about the capital budget over a 5-year horizon? Well, because these are projects that stick around for 20, 30 years. These are major assets. And so we try to forecast as best we can when these capital infrastructure projects are necessary. And so each year, we'd like to get into the habit of proving a 5-year capital improvement plan so the community knows what to expect from an overall scope of the overall budget for the 5-year time period, but also some idea of when capital projects may occur, knowing we can't possibly get to major projects all in one year. Try to smooth it out over the course of that time period. We've talked a lot in 5-year terms with you previously. In 2018, for the 2018 budget, I should say last fall, our departments identified over $75 million in need for capital projects, knowing we only have about $5 million of available funding. So it's a major gap, and it's why we've focused so much on the capital budget. It's also why we've encouraged the development of a strategic plan, is that so we can work through you on priorities and figure out exactly how to address those top priorities going forward in a world of limited funding. There are different sources for the capital improvement plan. It's not just general fund supported. Approximately $5 million is kind of in that general fund bucket. Our overall capital portfolio is much larger than that. That includes our utility, our water, our sewer, golf, so our overall enterprises, and then some other funds which will be touched on tonight. All of those are within your purview and should be a part of the capital discussion. The capital project supported by general fund is something that we focus on because the same pot of money that funds operations, as you've heard Manager Keck articulate, the same pot that funds our operations funds those capital projects in our capital project fund and through the public improvement fund. And so there's competing interests there, if you will, in making sure that what we have told the community we will provide year in and year out for services also supports our capital projects as well. There are other funding mechanisms. We're going to get into the sewer fund, for instance, tonight that funds some of our other utility projects. Those are of your importance as well, and we'll need guidance in those areas. So that makes up our entire capital improvement plan, and we'll be talking in those 5-year terms. What's really important before we start to dive into some of the issues is that we have to begin to show the year of actual expenditure when we're showing capital projects to you in the community. So what that means is that for those of you who have gone through a budget process previously, the capital budget may look a little different in that over the 5-year capital improvement plan, what we're encouraging in areas where we can, this isn't always possible, but is to show the project in the year of actual expenditure. So you know when we're planning an improvement, when we're designing something, and when we're actually constructing it. That's not just for you, but that's for the community as well. we'd also like to show, and what we do plan to do for the 2019 capital improvement plan, is to show you a capital budget based on what we actually expect for available funds. So I mentioned that departments identified over $75 million of improvement. Well, after 2018, it doesn't really mean much, knowing we don't have the available funding. So right now, and where we'll end tonight on capital projects, is going through a process of prioritization, so we know what projects are the top priority based on the current level of funding, knowing that if we have $75 million in need and only $25 million available, what are we actually proposing to be funded over that 5-year period, and what projects have been pushed out.
Assistant Manager Woulf, do you mind entertaining questions as we go
Of course.
along? Okay. Your person.
One question that I have is, I thought we had $6 million per year for capital improvements, and now we only have $5 million. Do we only have $5 million, or do we have $6 million?
It depends. It's a projection. So the Public Improvement Fund, and I can let Finance Director Wrinkle expand on this. The Public Improvement Fund is based off of incoming taxes. So that depends on the source of funds, and it varies year to year. The other general fund supported capital projects similarly are supported through sales and use tax as the big driver. So we've been in that $5 to $6 million range. I think, again, as we try to project out in the future, we try to err on the side of caution. So we certainly could have up to 6 in a good year. Some of that depends on the use of your reserves, which we'll talk about tonight. But it tends to be in that range.
So the capital improvement funds that we typically focus on are the general fund. We've got the PIF, and we've got capital projects within that whole realm. The PIF is funded by the vehicle use tax, the building use tax, and road and bridges that comes from the county. That ends up being about $3.5 million a year. Now, on top of that, we add additional funding from the general fund to fill in some gaps where we know we need more project money. We funded up to $1 million, a couple million in 1 year, and I think this last year in 2018 we brought over about $1 million to add to that $3.5 million. So it does vary, but it is in that range. The other amounts of money that we've got are in the enterprise funds, and those are funded through the fees that they charge, and they build up a reserve.
Okay. Now, we funded almost $6 million in capital projects for 2018.
I don't have my chart with me, but I think it was about $6 million.
And so what we're really talking about now is the 2019.
It's 2023. And we haven't allocated anything from general funds, so if we're working with just the taxes that come in, we're looking somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Valentine?
You said we had an additional $1 million this year. I thought we had an additional $3 million.
Could you talk just a bit louder? Not everyone.
You said we had an additional $1 million this year, and I thought we had an additional $3 million that we decided to go ahead and discuss and put into that capital improvement.
We put it in the fund balance.
We brought over the fund balance, but what we did add to that was $500,000 from the general fund, which we identified as a need. We brought it over from reserve. That was approved. And also another $500,000 from the housing development fund that was no longer required in that fund.
Okay,
So
even with all of those little ones, with the $6 million and the $3 million that we added, that should be $9 million.
I'm not understanding where you're seeing the three.
We had $6 million that we originally had. We had an additional $3 million that we went ahead and put in.
Yeah, I can clarify
that's
that.
9.
I can clarify that. So we did come back to the City Council. So what happened at the end of 2017 were that our revenues were greater than projected, and then we also had savings because our budget targets were about $1 million under where all departments in aggregate were. You are correct, Councilmember Barentine. I did come back and talk to Council about seeing if we could allocate that additional $3 million to capital projects, but the Council at the time decided not to actually reappropriate those funds, so they went into the unassigned fund balance. If we were to have added them to the capital budget or the capital project fund, that would have made it $9 million available. But we haven't determined what that surplus from 2017 should be allocated or appropriated for yet. and we're hopeful to have that conversation during this time as we're developing the budget. And so perhaps some of that unassigned fund balance, again, where if you look, our unassigned fund balance now is about 27%, where the code only requires us to have 16.7. You could allocate that to projects. And here tonight, you'll hear from several department directors that will make a pitch, if you will, for certain projects that should perhaps rise to the occasion for council to say, you know what, it makes sense to invest here or there. I'm not going to name the projects yet to poison your minds, but you will hear that tonight, and you might be able to allocate that funding to build some projects again.
I thought that we had a list of things that came to this council, including where we had the discussion about the roof. And so did we allocate $1 million extra of it, or did we do anything with the $3 million? And we need to have that conversation, because I thought we had allocated that money.
Now, I remember clearly that we didn't. So, I mean, if you want to go back in the minutes, we can probably take a look.
The roof
it would have been
there
here.
was very specific issues that got brought up that the city manager brought forward. So since that's already happened, maybe we should have that brought forward again.
I have another conversation.
That hasn't, because I don't remember it that clearly. I just thought we allocated it, so I was confused on the number.
I think it got put into the reserves because we couldn't come to a consensus on
Unassigned fund balance.
Okay, so we still have that unassigned fund balance to work with, which is $3 million, which would make the 6 into 9 for this year. Okay, thanks.
Chose to do
We're
that,
clear on that. We're at
Good question.
potential 9 right now. Okay.
Yes.
Better than we thought.
Later in
How
this,
about, in terms of timing, we've got 45 minutes allocated for this. How much time do you think each of your folks need to be presenting here so we can allow for some questions?
we have 45 minutes worth of content to
Okay.
present.
Thanks
go
for
for
clearing
it.
that up. I appreciate it.
Of course. And on a later slide, we do address the reserve policy, at least as it relates to what do we do in the event of excess funding, like in 2018, based on 2017 funding, so that we don't have to have this one-off conversation of, hey, what about these projects, that we have a clear articulated policy as to how to handle those situations. Hopefully it's an issue we have every year.
So I think we've pretty much covered the information on this slide, talking about the enterprise funds, how they're supported through their fees, and then the general fund pieces. So this is a chart you've seen, I'd say, most of before. I dropped off some of the prior years and just started with 17 to show you how much we've appropriated in the purple. The gold line, the solid line, is the funding that comes in through those taxes I discussed. And the hatched lines in these bars are the identified needs at this point. Now, we're still working through this, so they could modify a little bit, but I don't know that the needs are going to go away. So we have a 3% increase built into the revenue, but we've got over $77 million just in these 5 years, and another 200 plus million, sorry. Comma's in the wrong spot for me. In the years out another 15 years, so we've got kind of a 20-year forecast. Again, the earlier 5 years are a whole lot better than the last 15 in terms of how firm the need and money is.
So to hammer that point home is that the challenges ahead really come back to our discussions with this council as to how to handle funding into the future. Certainly there's going to be delays to major projects. That's just the reality we're in. You saw the bars on the previous slide. If we only have $5 to $6 million, perhaps some use of the unallocated fund balance will help, but it'll only get us through so far. So that means prioritization of projects, understanding that several larger projects may get delayed into the future, and that discussion needs to happen or start tonight and then happen over the next several months. We have July community budget workshops, which we can discuss. We have our conversations with you in August, and then again the public hearing and final adoption in September and October. So we have some time, but the bottom line is that there will be projects that will be delayed based on current funding. So we'll put some of those issues out there tonight so you understand where we're at. All right, now we're going to get into a little bit more specifics and talking through some issues. I'm going to ask Blair in his chair, our interim director at the South Platte Water Renewal Partners. Let him borrow the mic, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about the sewer fund.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thanks for your time this evening. I was here to talk a little bit high level on the sewer fund. The sewer costs that Inglewood experiences are driven primarily by the South Platte Water Renewal Partners. Most of it, 88%, is a pass-through of the South Platte Water Renewal Partners costs, and that's because we're the third largest plant in the state of Colorado. We serve Inglewood and then also Littleton, and then 19 connector districts that hook on to both you and Littleton. So it's you bet. Sorry about that. So we serve over 300,000 customers, and that consists of those two cities and the 19 connector districts. Did you want to take this one? Or?
Oh, sorry about that. Good evening. We are expecting a rate increase, and the drivers for that rate increase are going to be maintenance activities, asset management, and also regulatory requirements will drive that. We're in the process right now of finalizing a cost study. That cost study, and then with input from you on projects, is how we will move forward with the rate increase. It'll be several steps, starting with the joint council, and there'll be a slide addressing this somewhere in here. Start with the joint councils, it'll go back to council, water and sewer board, all rate hikes go to water and sewer board, and then out to the public. I'm paraphrasing pretty quickly.
We do have a slide on that here.
So as Tom mentioned, we're doing this 10-year rate analysis. Some of that is coming from the strategic operations plan, where we're looking at what we need in the future to meet our regulations and our compliance schedules. Some of that's coming from this deferred maintenance that, you know, it's like you can get away with not changing your oil in your car to maybe 25,000 miles, but then at that time you got bigger problems. So we're trying to take a proactive kind of approach to maintenance and repair so that we don't end up with the you know, car with big issues after a certain period of time. So the philosophy, you know, going forward would be to steadily increase rates at a manageable level rather than this one-time big hit, you know, when we find out we're behind the 8 ball. So that's kind of the approach we're taking, and more will be forthcoming in the meetings that Tom mentioned on the exact costs and the exact projects that we've put in that rate study. I think Tom covered most of this. You know, Littleton Inglewood Joint Council, you all have a meeting jointly with the City of Littleton at our facility in July, so there'll be more information on these projects and our capital plans in July. There's also a South Platte Water Renewal Partner Supervisory Committee meeting. In the meantime, Water and Sewer Board and Inglewood City Council study session in October. So you'll hear about this so much you might get tired of it, but you'll definitely get another more chances to give input and you know, take a crack at you know, a deeper dive into some of this.
And I think why the reason this is being brought up in the context of the capital budget is that your decisions, input on the capital budget at the wastewater facility ultimately end up driving the rates. And so we're basing our sewer rate study off of current capital projections, but those are projections until we get your input, the joint council's input, ultimately on what those capital projects are going forward, and based on that input, you get your assumptions in the rate study. So we kind of have to do both at the same time, but that's why we're discussing it now. It's something of public interest for sure, and so there'll be plenty of opportunity for future discussion on this. But at least wanted to put it out there on the radar this evening.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell has a question or comment.
Can I ask why we would go to in-city with the first rate increase when we've paid the owners of this plant have paid to do the infrastructure instead of going outside to the connector districts who are contracting with us? I mean, is there a reason that we're going out to them, or we're going to ourselves first?
Yes, that's the way the billing falls. In city, we bill quarterly. Our connectors districts, we bill yearly in arrears. So that was just a projection of the way the billing would fall out.
Okay, then I have one other question. Is the biogas project driving this rate increase? If the biogas project were not on the table, would we even be having to do a rate study?
The biogas project, as you remember, was about $8 million, $7.5 million. So that's it's a lot of money, but in relationship to the needs as far as capital repair and maintenance and new facilities that we're going to need to build to meet Regulation 85 for nutrient removal, it's a pretty small piece of the whole pie.
But if we need that money to do the other piece, if we have that $8 million to do that other piece, would we need to go for a rate increase? That is my question. Forget the $8 million. If we're just doing the things that we need to do to maintain the plant, would we need to go for a rate increase?
Yes, we definitely would still need to go for a rate increase.
We would need to go for the rate increase. It might be delayed a little bit, but the big dollars are really in the regulatory requirements that are out in the farther years. The biogas project, although we put a little bit of money up front, it pays for itself in 3 years, and then we actually have revenue that helps offset our other expenses from it. So it's really in, even though we put money up front, in benefit for the history of the rest of the plant. It'll cover the rest of the
If the renewable energy credits go away, it will never pay for itself.
We do have a few slides specifically on the biogas project.
Okay.
I think, generally speaking, the less capital projects you do, the less overall rates you'll need. I think the point we're talking about tonight is at some point in the near future, we'll need to look at
Move
something.
the mic over.
Sorry.
I keep forgetting that. Well, at some point in the near future, we'll have to look at rate increases to the scale, to the timing. That, of course, depends on the scope of the capital work that we decide we need.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're going to switch gears a little bit.
You mind if I ask a question?
Well, I had mine.
I'm sorry. Yes. Councilmember Sierra.
Oh, okay.
Councilmember Valentine.
Just a quick question. So going back to the cost slide, there's the average of $14 million per year going through 2026. Then it jumps to $21 million starting in 2027. What's the driver there?
So the near term is at Reg 85 compliance, which is nutrient removal, but it's at a higher level. It's a total inorganic nitrogen number and phosphorus number that's about a order of magnitude above what's coming in for what they call Regulation 31. So that's why the first part is smaller. That's to meet Reg 85. And then the second number is for that increased compliance to meet Reg 31. The good part, or the good news is, the farther we can push that out, the more technology can evolve and the more we can get a better handle on what we might need, so those costs could come down in the long term. But in the near term, we're faced with meeting Regulation 85 for the ammonia and phosphorus removal.
Okay.
Councilmember Valentine.
Well, we certainly went ahead and changed between the two councils what they decided to do as far as regulatory issues and, of course, the permitting. So those are kind of speculative numbers, Councilmember Sierra. So that's something we'll kind of, I assume, discuss at the joint meeting as well with the regulatory.
Yeah, we can dive deeper at the joint council meeting. I mean, the regulations are set. Our approach to meeting those, we look forward to your input and talking to you about that.
Just to clarify, for the biogas, it cannot pay for itself in 3 years. It takes a certain amount of time to be built. And so it's not going to pay for itself in 3 years from when we initiate this. It has to be built. That's 2 years, about 18 months, something. And then we have to pay back $8.7 million. And so I've never heard the 3 year that it will pay for itself in that period of time. I heard anywhere from 4 to 6 after it was built. So we need to maybe we could get a little bit more information, as we're going forward on that, but it can't just artificially just keep coming down. And the contract, what we said last year was that the payment contract for the $168 million that Littleton and Inglewood paid for, that's with financing. For the expansion of the plant, we're still paying that off. That contract requires us to keep at least $4 million in reserve. And what we're doing, at the time I asked, if we do the biogas, is it going to make a rate increase? And when I found the contract, it says that if we use the money, the reserve, for the biogas, it automatically triggers a rate increase. So I think that we need to make sure that we're being sincere with the constituency when we say this isn't going to cost you anything, it's going to be money coming in, that we're sincere in being honest with them that if we use that $4 million, it's what's triggering that rate increase in the study. Could we also get the information when you come next time for the last time a 10-year cost study was done and the previous maintenance schedule and capital projects as well that we had gone over before, so that we have an apples-to-apples comparison about what was anticipated at that time and then what we're doing now. I can understand I don't think 2015 is like outrageous that was the last time we had a rate increase. That's a couple of years ago. So if we could have a little bit more information so that we can kind of take a look at that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much for your work on that.
Manager Keck.
Yeah, just quickly, Mayor, Council, as you recall, Councilmember Barentine did raise the concern or question as a council request, I believe, on the reserves. And we determined after looking through the actual agreements, there are two reserves. There is a arbitrage reserve, which is the $4 million, which is held by our bond issuer. And then there's the other reserve that we are required to have, which currently there is adequate funding in that. But the $4 million reserve is the arbitrage or the bond reserve that's required. And we confirmed that with our bond counsel, just to help put people's mind at ease there.
That's really important. Thank you. Councilmember Barentine, could I ask you to find the little stick underneath your tent there for your name and give that to Manager Keck so that when he wants to speak, underneath your name tag, there is a... Oh, surprise, surprise. So I just didn't know that he wanted to speak until he held his hand up.
Point of information, when you're talking about that money, is that what shows up in the water and sewer budget as that reserve piece of that? No. Because when I asked for that before, that's what I was told. That's where that money was. So if we could, I will add to my request. I would like to see where in the budget this funding is, because prior I was told that the $3.5 million that was being held in reserve, or $4 million, was exactly the reserve that we were talking about contractually. So if you could show me in the budget where that is and how that works with the contract, I'd appreciate it. Anecdotally won't help me right now. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. We will switch gears slightly now, although we'll be right back to biogas, so fear not.
Good evening, Council. Mayor.
You can move the mic close. I know it's not.
How's that? Capital needs for the Parks, Rec, and Library Department were defined in part by the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which was adopted by Council last year in March of 2017. Key findings of the master plan included 3 big park renovations: Cushing, Jason, and Miller, in that order. They also said grow the recreation centers and invest in those, and make some improvements in Pirates Cove, not an expansion of Pirates Cove, but some improvements. In 2018, the capital projects that we've been able to undertake are smaller projects. Bertolo, Bellevue, both of those due to grant funding from the Arapahoe County Open Space. We're doing a small upgrade at the Bellevue Children's Farm with monies from the Conservation Trust Fund. Parking lot resurfacing is about $50,000 and is a continuing capital purchase. For 2019, our preliminary plans would include improvements at the Englewood Recreation Center, the entryway for safety purposes, and an improved youth activity area and access to the pool. We also would recommend Cushing Park. We need to do planning and design for our park project. The Pirates Cove water feature, that's just the central play area with the bucket, for those of you who are familiar with Pirates Cove. An unexpected necessity is to pay some attention to Little Dry Creek at the plaza, the corner of Hamden and Hamden and Broadway, where the fiber dam, which created the pond, failed irreparably, kind of an infrastructure disaster. So we're looking at conceptual ideas about how to revitalize that space. If we were to do them all at one time, it would cost about $12 million, which is clearly outside of our scope. I would mention that our current debt information is a general obligation bond, which was issued in 2001 to build Pirates Cove, to expand the rec center and Maui expansions. It generates about $1 million in revenue from a mill levy that covers our debt service. It doesn't provide any operating or any capital funds to the current department. That bond matures in 2023. We have a few other sources of funds. I've mentioned the Open Space Fund through Arapahoe County. We get an allocation based on population every year. That's about $800,000. The Conservation Trust Fund is through the Colorado Lottery. We get about $300,000 from those. Those are restricted funds. We can't use them for general operations. They have to be used for specific projects. And I'd say about 75% of that income is used every year for general asset maintenance, not for capital projects. We also have a small source of funding through the Parks Fee in Lieu. Since 2012, we've accumulated about $360,000 that can be used for park improvements only, and some small funds in the Donors Fund. Clearly, Council needs to help us establish priorities on what projects we can do and what projects will unfortunately be postponed to a later date. Questions?
Member Barentine.
Could we get an accounting of the in lieu of fund? This is the first time I've heard it mentioned again for a while, and it may just be that I just forgot about it and kind of where that money's come from. I think that's kind of been used almost as an impact fee type of thing in the past, and I think we probably need to explore the impact fees again, hopefully before we stop doing any construction. But I would like to see kind of an accounting where that money has come from, what projects that's come from. I think that would make some impact, in my mind at least, that if there's certain areas where there were construction, where that money came from, we might want to focus a little bit more in some of those areas. I mean, it may be a consideration, it may not for this council, but I think it would be interesting to find out what developments, what construction contributed to that fund, and for what.
I'm sure we can find that.
And if it matters to this council, they may wish to focus on some of those areas where it came from.
I do think it's important to note that we haven't expended any of those funds in the past, so that's our total accumulation. But
I appreciate that, and it may be over some time, and so I just don't want to miss any contributing areas that we may want to give a little
certainly we can
consideration
get that
to.
information to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. To our favorite topic.
City Center first.
That's a good one.
Yes. So you heard at length this evening about the real estate situation around City Center here. Focusing for a moment on the Civic Center, it relates in that, based on council direction, we may have a better idea on how to budget for capital improvements at this building. For instance, we know that we have a roof replacement that is overdue for this building. Our building envelope is compromised. Not only does that not help us on the saving energy front, but it isn't that great in keeping insects out either. So we have a need there. All of our elevators need either significant improvement or replacing. I can let Manager Keck expand on this thought, but we're really hesitant to put major investment into this building unless we have solid council direction on the future of this building. And so how that relates to your conversation earlier on the city center in general is to what extent this council wants to be involved in those redevelopment discussions gives us some insight on how to handle this building. And so obviously we're not going to get an answer in one PowerPoint slide tonight and in a 5-minute discussion, but again, it's one of those things that we've identified the need. It's not a small dollar amount. I can tell you that the roof replacement alone is north of $2 million if we want to move the solar. We wouldn't recommend putting that type of investment in the building if we know we're not staying in the building. And so those are the types of discussions that we know we need to have with this council, and it is not too early to have those given the needs for improvements at this building.
Before you speak, Councilmember Barrington, so can you, in the next, can you tell us what you think we need to, what are the priorities there we need to really be thinking about? I mean, in making that suggestion to you, what do you think are the key pieces we should be considering? I mean, not the items, but our thinking process.
Right. Well, I certainly would yield if anybody smarter on real estate and our position want to speak. I think generally the important part is what role does this building play into the future discussion of the city center overall? If we know that we want to stay in this building, that all of our city functions remain in the envelope of this building, then we would recommend to do the listed investments on the slide. If not, if it's in play, or at least the council wants to explore whether or not it's this year or later this year or into the next 18 months, if that's the pulse of council, then we may be able to get by on doing some additional patching work or whatever to keep the building afloat without doing major infrastructure improvements, knowing that discussion's on the horizon. It's that type of distinction between the two options I think would be really helpful at some point.
Member Wink has hers up, but Member Barrington, did you have yours up and then put it down?
It was from before.
Okay, great. Member Wink and then Manager Keck.
Thank you. So regarding council providing some priority and direction in terms of do we want to stay in the building and repair, replace, or move, I mean, we've had this conversation a few times, and I just want to make sure I'm on the right track here. Council's provided some feedback in terms of prioritization of all of the initiatives and goals that we outlined as a starting point for our strategic plan, which we'll discuss later in the evening, and which includes capital improvement. And so do the results from the information we just provided not sort of help point in a direction in which we can then capture pieces like city center within the block of, and then Parks and Rec? So
right.
we constantly talk about prioritization. Now we've begun to do it. Does it seem it's going to be efficient for helping iron out all of these line items, or not, the level of what we just submitted as a start?
It helps. I'd say it's another baby step forward.
Too much of a baby step.
You've identified that a prioritization model for our capital budget is really important. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We're kind of moving on parallel tracks. We're in the process of developing a 2019 capital improvement plan that it tries to give you a realistic perspective of what the next 5 years looks like for capital funding. You've also identified that you'd like to be more involved in that prioritization. So we're trying to do both. A discussion like this, I don't think, can be solved with just ranking a priority on a list. And so that's where we would need to get some idea on how you want to approach the discussion. I think what you heard from Mr. Paremba tonight is that we are monitoring the situation. It's probably months before we have a more concrete answer on where that real estate transaction is going and what position we might want to set ourselves up to be in as a city. To the extent that the council wants to be involved in that, and whether or not this building is a part of that discussion or not, whether it's on the table or not, that's the type of discussion that we need to have, and it relates back to how we ultimately plan for the capital budget.
Manager Keck.
Mr. Woulf just stated what I was going to enunciate, and that is, we need to be looking very carefully what is transpiring with the Weingarten sale. Here to this point, there have been a few external parties who've said in order to do an appropriate redevelopment or TOD redevelopment that this building may play a role in that. And so there is some time, or will be some time yet, for council to consider that and how that might play itself out, knowing, again, there needs to be some sort of public process to talk about what would happen if the city were not here in this building and where would we go. But there is considerable redevelopment being proposed, or at least talked about, from Broadway to Santa Fe, from Hamden to Floyd, that could prevent or propose an opportunity for the city to reposition itself, move the building, and take a spot someplace else within the Civic Center area or elsewhere within this particular area to facilitate redevelopment. So just keep that in mind. And again, if the council were to decide to stay and remain in this building, some of these things are enunciated here for cost. One of them that I would recommend the city do would be to actually re-tenant this space. It's because right now we have an overabundance of space, and I know some people like the fact that it's so open, but if we were to occupy a smaller footprint from the city's business perspective, then other space might be able to be utilized for lease to the private sector, and so that would provide some opportunities there as well.
And I think the point is to not feel like you have to make a decision on the future of this building in the next few months, that there'd be significant process for that. But in planning, when we're talking about a capital improvement plan, the roof replacement, if we know that this council is leaning towards staying in this building, that all of a sudden moves up on the priority list, at least in our recommended budget. So that's $2 million or so. If you're leaning the other direction for a lengthier process to engage the public on the future of the site and including this building, well, then all of a sudden that $2 million for the roof might be planned for a future year out. And now that $2 million becomes real money that's available in 19 for parks projects or rec center improvements. And so it is that ultimate trade-off where those policy discussions end up impacting the capital budget.
We have 15 minutes left to cover 3 different other areas. Are we going to be okay? Should I take another question?
We can speed up a bit.
Okay, Councilmember Barentine.
I think it's going to be impossible for this council, given the pushback the last time that leaving City Center came up, and the desire for the community to want to be able to vote on that, given the direction that council seemed to be going in at the time. And in respect for that, they're just a few years away from paying off $23.5 million. They paid off $23.5 million, then we'll own the building that we want to leave. And so we'll have to really include this in the conversation, because if we're going to be making decisions now, or we're being asked to make decisions now based on whether we're going to stay in this building or not, I think we're kind of excluding the partners that paid for this. Because we could have, over the last, since 2003, we could have used $23.5 million of the city's money for other something else. So I think we need to have a little bit more concrete information before we move forward on what we're doing and start including the citizenry a little bit more openly if we're really considering not staying here. And if our decisions to do capital improvements are going to push that one way or the other, then we need to be honest about that and get that feedback as soon as possible.
I certainly didn't hear anything that would preclude that process of including the community in any way whatsoever in your plan, but let's keep
not
that
precluding it.
Let's make sure that it is.
Absolutely.
Right.
I think what I was saying was that the decision is being based on whether we will stay in the building or not, and that's what you stated pretty clearly. And if that's the case, then we need to make sure that we're moving forward a little bit more openly with the public. I thought I made that pretty clear,
Right.
that
I
they
think
had
we're
not
all,
said that.
that's a good thing.
But
Yes, there needs to be an intentional process in engaging with the public.
And we'll want to be outlining that as a council and what we think are the best ways. And we've had some great track record with that in the last, I think, 6-8 months anyway. So
I wouldn't want them to think, since we already decided not to do the roof, that it's kind of a done deal that we're not going to stay here. So
absolutely,
I don't want the chicken to come before the egg, or the egg, and whichever way that goes.
Continue on to our second favorite item.
All right, I will try to hustle through this in the interest of time. This is just one example of a capital project we wanted to feature. As you know, we bring capital projects all the time, whether they're a digester lid replacement or bar screen replacement. So this is one of them, and I wanted to kind of to go through it to refresh your memory and kind of give you an update of where we're at in the process. We're going to have more discussion on this at the joint council meeting, and then it'll be brought before the council at an August meeting to approve or not approve. So I'll just run through kind of the overarching goals of the project. So the wastewater plant, we get wastewater and we separate it out, liquid and the solids. The solids go to a big tank called a digester, and what it is bacteria, anaerobic bacteria. So they don't use oxygen, and they eat up the solids and they produce a gas, a methane gas, as a byproduct of that. So right now what we're doing is taking that gas, which isn't pure gas. It's gas with hydrogen sulfide and siloxanes and CO2 and some other impurities, and we flare that off, and so that's producing some greenhouse gases, and we're also losing that heat value of the gas we're producing. So if you can go to the next slide, the project is to recapture that biogas, turn it into renewable natural gas. So instead of going to the flare and being flared off, we would send it to a treatment skid, and it would remove all those impurities that I talked about, pressurize it, and then we're fortunate to have an XL pipeline north of the plant, very close. So it would inject it into that XL pipeline. We would sell it through the XL system and recapture environmental credits that are available under the renewable fuel standard. So that's kind of the impetus of the project. The timeline, I don't know, you can't read that, but I should have made it bigger. But what that says is we're going to present this more to you, and you guys are, I think, more in the know than the Littleton City Council. So at that joint meeting, we're going to kind of dig in a little deeper and go over the project. We're also going to bring it to the supervisory committee of the plant for their approval, and then it'll come back before this council in August for a vote to go or not go. If we do proceed with the project, procurement and construction would start immediately after that, and it's projected to be completed and commissioned by July of 2009. So that's kind of where we stand on the project, and I know there's a lot of interest in the project and a lot of more discussion that's probably warranted, but that's where we stand now.
And part of the reason to bring this up this evening is that because of the timing, you'll see it budgeted for not only in 2018 as you saw it and approved this last year, but also in 19 for the completion of the project.
Yeah, we're working on the construction piece right now to bring to the council, and that'll inform us better how much we could spend in 2018, how much will need to be carried forward.
Councilwoman Valentine, do you have a question, or is that sitting up from last time?
No, it's
okay.
not sitting up from last time. Along with the previous 5, because I requested the last study done, the schedule for the capital projects, previous maintenance schedule that you had, when the rate would be done for the outside, when a rate increase would be scheduled for the outside, and what that would look like, if you would include that, since I thought Councilmember Russell's question was really good about why we're raising rates on our citizens when they've paid for this infrastructure and not raising the rates on our customers first. And then get a defined timeline on the biogas, because we keep hearing project and when it's going to pay for itself and be built, because the times kind of keep moving around a little, and that may just be as a result of the project piece of it. Where the reserve is in the budget. I've added 2 more, if you could please, and I think our city attorney has made it quite clear that enterprise funds can loan money to the city, and I believe that they have. Could we get an accounting of any money that has been loaned to the city from the wastewater treatment plant and when that was paid back, or if it has been? And then if we could include from my reading of the contract with the Crello report, there is potential maybe additional $2 million that we may need to pay for the piping or this partnership with XL because of some of the piping in there and the way we're doing the gas. So if the presentation for the joint meeting could include that as well. Any additional costs that would be along with any additional cost that it would be to bring the gas to natural gas density if we should, in order to straight sell it, if our partnership should fail. And I believe that was another $2 to $3 million. So if we could just make sure those are included in the presentation.
Yeah, by that time we should have the cost for the XL interconnect as well as the construction of the treatment skid.
Right, because it seemed like they were putting that cost back on us, and I believe the cost was around $2 million. But I don't want to anecdotally try to make you answer it now, but if it could be included in the presentation, and I'll just save these and ask those questions at that presentation. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
I think many of those questions will be answered, Mayor and Council, for the July 19th meeting. Matter of fact, I know all of them will be. I've already spoken with Mr. Corning earlier today to ensure that those materials go out not just a week ahead of time, but perhaps we can have 2 weeks ahead of time, so you'll have those along with the Littleton Council to read through.
Question about that then. If they go out a week or two ahead of time and there's something missing, can we email quickly and say, hey, could you also include this if it's possible?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's really twofold. I mean, this is a big project that's being proposed. I mean, it's not only is the $7.8 million cost a big number, but there are multiple facets. You've got 3 agreements, really, if you look at it. You have a broker agreement for the RINs, the renewable energy credits. You've got an agreement with Excel, and then you have an agreement with what we were talking about going the construction manager, general contractor, at-risk type of project delivery method. And so you have 3 agreements, and so all those types of things will be provided to you to examine and ask questions upon prior to the meeting. And again, we would hope that you would raise those questions ahead of time so that staff can be prepared to answer them.
Thank you. Before we move on to general fund reserve, I want to thank you again for the open house that you did last week. It was pretty amazing, and it was a great turnout. So I learned a lot, and I heard lots of conversation from folks in the community about the biogas recapture project and how excited they were and how much information they learned just from being there and what it could mean. So thank you.
Thank you. There was a dunk tank.
The dunk tank was nice. General fund reserve policy?
Thank you. I'd like to start with explaining the chart on the right, which will kind of hit most of the bullet points. So I'm sorry for the wording behind the logo there, but the dark blue line is actually the total amount that we have in our general fund reserve at this point. The line to the right of it, the yellow and green line, it bifurcates it into what is required for us to hold for minimum, which is 16.67% of the revenue, or 2 months of reserve, basically, and that's almost $9 million. We also have $6.2 million above that, and that was the 27% that Eric was mentioning versus the 16.67. That's almost double what we need, 179% of what we really need. So we would like to have the council consider, because of best practice, to use available funds to help with capital shortfalls where you have needs, and the fact that we need to maintain our assets. We'd like to have council consider possibly using that fund, all that money above the minimum for that purpose, or possibly setting a maximum for the policy to adjust the policy so that we have clear direction that above that maximum amount we can allocate to capital needs.
Mayor Pro Tem.
How much money was in the ladder fund? I mean, how much money?
$3.4 million right now, as of the end of the year, and it grows by about $1.5 million each year based on the rents that also get put in. Now that $1.5 million adjusts a little because we have escalation clauses in the leases.
So how much did you say is in the ladder fund?
$3.4 million.
$3.4 million, and is that everything that's supposed to be there? Did we borrow money from the ladder fund for the reserve accounts?
No, but what was borrowed, if you recall, EMRF asked for a loan to produce or construct Plaza Circle, and I believe that money has been paid back for the first few phases. Mr. Brennan knows these answers better than I, but no other money was utilized for the reserve. That does count. The long-term asset reserve fund does count as part of our reserves, but again, the details of how much we still owe on that can be answered by Mr. Brennan.
Yeah, the 800,000, it was just in 2016 budget process, council approved holding that out. So instead of transferring it in, it was held out in reserve for the building of the road, which you will be seeing next week at the council meeting. We've come to an agreement with RTD.
Thank you. So is it possible, what was the latter reserve fund for? I mean, council set it aside for some reason, and can we separate it back out and then just have our reserve money that we have to have according to policy?
The quick answer to that is yes, you could separate that out. I know council has gone back and forth. Since I've been here now for nearly 4 years, we've had this discussion. It seemed like 3 out of the 4 years. It could happen that this council decides that the revenues gained from EMRF go to the general fund as opposed to the long-term asset reserve fund. That's a policy question that this council can make instead of putting that into the LTAR, which, frankly, there hasn't been an identified use for that. It's just, hey, this is great to have this, and so if, in fact, a project came along that would generate a return on the city's investment from the long-term asset reserve fund, that's where you would utilize those funds. But I think the council as a whole, again, would have to give us very clear direction, beginning for the FY19 budget, for example, to not put additional revenues from EMRF into that, but rather the general fund. We need that kind of direction from you to make that happen.
Just one more question. It seems to me, and I wasn't around when the latter fund was established, but that it was established because we sold assets.
Correct.
And we wanted to recoup other assets rather than spending it in the general fund.
That's correct. Yeah, the nexus is correct as you've described.
Okay.
When I came on, which is a while ago, but if you talk to John Moore about it, they called it affectionately the later fund, and it doesn't make sense with the acronym necessarily, but it was meant to be not just later, that it would be spent after it accrued money, but also that whatever it was used for would benefit the whole city over time. So it wasn't just a one-thing thing, although it could be a one-time thing that then had huge impact. Like, let's say all of a sudden the world went to city centers as Cinderella City again. That's not going to happen, but that if we did that, that might have this long-term asset that's constantly giving to the city again. So, but I've heard other people that were on council at the time talk about it being infrastructure that is long-term too. So I think it's our duty to look back at what was said, but then think about what's our best decision going forward given the day that we're asked to make this decision. Okay, Councilmember Barentine.
You're correct. I was on council then. John Moore is correct. It was an asset for an asset. It was the intention of it being an asset purchase for giving up an asset that we gave up that the citizens owned. That they had something that was tangible, hardcore, that could possibly make them money, and that it would. So I think council at the time was pretty solid on that piece of it. There have been money. The original money was golf course land that we gave up for River Point over there, $4.1 million. And at the time, kind of talking about maybe that would have gone in, which would have been our share at the time for the Bates Logan RTD station, which would have been a pretty significant impact, actually. And our portion was $4 million at that time, but they didn't act on it. But a significant amount of that original money was spent well before you ever showed up, and well before you were on council, or maybe around that time, I don't know, that they did use money from that later fund to shore up the general budget, and that's just...
We put it all back.
It's
all put back.
Yet it's not $4.1 million. So if it had all been put back, we would at least be there, and we've had another one that was put in when we bought, when the RTD bought did the eminent domain on the...
Douglas County land.
on the land in Douglas County for that light rail station out there, which was another, I think, $4 million as well. So plus the money that's been coming in. So it's not possible that it's all been paid back, but we want to be very cautious that we're using that money for that purpose, and I appreciate you remembering that discussion. The
Councilmember Barrington, is your next statement really important? I'd like to have them be able to finish.
I'd like to ask the question I was doing
on
since
this?
you
Okay,
started
great.
that conversation. I just finished
Great.
up on that. So the 2 months reserve of, I thought Tabor required 3. Tabor only requires 2 months?
This is our policy. This is not a Tabor requirement. Tabor is related to taxes and the approval of taxes.
Okay, so this is on top of the on top of Tabor.
Oh,
that
there
you're
is a
talking
Tabor
about.
reserve of 3%. Yes, you're right
Okay.
on that one.
Is
yeah.
the Tabor reserve included in this money?
No, it is not.
Okay, then we're only talking about our individual policy. And so on top of this, you have the Tabor reserve as well, and Tabor reserve is 3 months.
3%.
3%.
Or 3%, I don't know. Where, okay, now I know where I got the 3.
2 and 3 get mixed up.
Okay, so, I'm sorry.
No, 2 and 3 get mixed up because the long-term asset is also 3.4, so I can see how we continue to,
Recycle numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, so none of this would affect the Tabor reserve at all. And so with the Tabor reserve, I would kind of like to make sure that we're including that, because if we look at this and we go, our general fund reserve policy only reserves money for 2 months, that's not actually true. I mean, we have the Tabor reserve as well, and while it can't be touched, I understand that it's still there.
It can be touched, but it does need to be
Well,
paid back
within
the year.
Pretty defined by legislation.
So
by
pretty
the
much
legislature.
you don't touch it.
So I would like to see that included in there. And then I do kind of agree that we might have a little bit excessive on there when we have so many other issues going on, but I really would like to see if this council, I would make the suggestion that if this council decides to cut back on any of this reserve, that we are very specific on how any of this money would be spent and very defined guidelines on what we would use any reserve money for going in, whether it would go into capital improvements or what it would be, but it's very defined, not just siphoning back into the general fund. So I appreciate you bringing forward this information. If you could just add the Tabor piece of it so that the citizens are aware that we have that safety net, as well as what we've put in through here as well. And I think the 16.67 maybe it is a little high, we don't know, but I need to see it kind of all together if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I would like to ask that we put this whole discussion of reserve on the discussion when we talk about this again, because we have new people. 16% was decided by a past council. We do get reports every month from you on the financials that show the Tabor and show the whole amount of reserve, and it's 27%. 27%. We just looked at that a couple weeks ago, so it's, but let's take another look at that and have a conversation. Thank you. One more, right?
2 more.
Just one more question. Could you please put our liabilities with the pensions and that, whatever that kind of debt is, kind of juxtaposed with what our reserves are and whether we would be covered if that all came due as well? Thank you.
Quickly, I was just going to suggest a study session on the handling of the long-term asset reserve policy and also the general fund reserve policy.
That would be a great discussion.
Great.
2 more.
That is a perfect conclusion to the topic. All right, so prioritization. Obviously, a part of the theme is that we may not be able to answer all the questions as it relates to our limited funding in 1 year, in a few months as it leads up to the capital budget. So as it relates to leading up to our overall 2019 budget. So what we talked about as a part of your strategic planning process is a council-approved matrix or criteria for that prioritization of capital projects. So that could be very complex. That could be relatively simple. I've put together what essentially we've utilized in the past for prioritization. If this is a good model, we're happy to go forward with it and show you how capital projects relate or hit these criteria as we show you the distinction between departmental requests and ultimately what gets put forth in the proposed capital improvement plan. We'd like to show you the difference between those two. That's where you can see what the overall quote need is, those green bars that Kathy showed you earlier, and what ultimately is put forth in the 5-year capital improvement plan based on available funding. The difference between those two will be based on some matrix for prioritization, and that's what this council requested, is some type of criteria to approve. So what we've used previously is, does the project enhance public safety? Does the project enhance or extend the life of an existing asset? So the key word there is existing. Is the underlying asset critical to the operations of the city? Does the underlying asset or the service that the asset supports generate revenue? And is the project related to one or more community goals? So those are very broad, but at least it gives us some framework to focus on as we're putting together a list of capital projects.
So you would like feedback on these now?
I would, or at least if nothing else, some idea of where the council would like to go with criteria for prioritization, knowing that we have asked departments to submit their departmental requests for capital projects for the 5-year time period by June 22nd, which is coming up pretty quick. And we would ideally be presenting council a proposed capital improvement plan by August 13th. So we don't have a ton of time. So any feedback on how you would like to proceed to be involved in that prioritization would be great.
Great. Feedback? Member Martinez?
I think these are really great. When I was thinking through some of this, the first two that came to my mind were the public safety piece and the critical operations of the city. The other, I think those two are the most important. I think the others are kind of secondarily important.
Member Valentine?
Could we get a little update on your process with the Planning and Zoning Board and how that's looking and how that impacts this, please?
Sure. So I did meet with the Planning and Zoning Commission last Tuesday evening on the 5th, and there was quite a bit of conversation about projects as they looked over the capital project universe, so to speak. And what emanated from that were really a few priority projects. And specifically, they looked at what projects would be aligned with what those things that they would see, which would help promote development or alleviate the negative impacts of development. And what those projects were, number one, was the Oxford Rail Trail Bridge to help facilitate getting people off of Oxford, crossing on the street, and obviously crossing over. That was number one. Number two, they wanted to see Cushing Park looked at for redesign or redevelopment. Specifically, they brought up the skate park and playground, the components. Number three, they brought up Broadway, the landscaping basically from Yale to 285, that they'd like to see a concerted effort move to get that project moving. And then after that, there was, number four was a integrated technology system for our traffic, so helping to, a smart traffic system, in other words, and Maria DeAndrea, who's here again this evening, our Public Works Director, has some experience with that and is already in conversation with what that might look like for Englewood moving forward. And then fifth, after the transportation or traffic system technology, was looking at the other overpasses, so Hamden and Dartmouth being those priorities. So those were the things that emanated from their list. What they were very sensitive to was the limited funding. And so they did not specify what years they wanted to see those programs or projects happen. They said these are our top concerns and considerations, so work those in with the council however you see fit that works the time frame.
And do you know when that report from them will be coming?
I don't believe they're going to put out a formal report. It was a study session topic, and they just kind of gave me their feedback. At the very end, I did a summarization again to enunciate what they wanted, and they agreed, yes, that's what we stated we wanted you to do. We were a little bit constrained for time as they had a public hearing at 7 p.m., and so I was there from 6 to 7.
Because of the different conversation going on with the charter, I would at least like to see that, what you've gone over and what you did with them documented, so thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Any other comments on these priorities, the criteria? They seem really helpful to me. They would be useful to me in making decisions. Is there anything missing? Does anyone think there's something off kilter? Looks like it's a good start.
Great. So we will provide this context when we put forth the proposed capital improvement plan, so you can see how we made those decisions and going from the departmental request to ultimately the proposed capital improvement plan.
Okay, great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much. If you have any other questions on the capital budget, we can take them. Otherwise, I'm assuming we'll give you a break and then move
I
to
think we
operating.
need a break. 5-minute break. At least I. Let's get warm. It's kind of nice for a while.
Councilmember Custer, can I ask you a question?
Sure. You have to tell you that I should make it to the restaurant before we start.
So she wants to know if it's okay. She's like, found this cat at this place. If it's yours, let me know. And so she took it home and she went to the shop. And so now we're all fighting over what's
Sure.
good. She's like, oh, okay, Francis, family.
Yeah. When we start getting his name.
Which I'm all for. But I'm also for having Mark.
Cat.
Yes. I don't know, I was like, no, Mark, he's totally okay.
It's a little warm though.
You're 1.5 miles.
I know. We're going to get into
Yeah.
I just told him this is my hours to take a break.
I'm on that block.
And I keep seeing all these, like, cheesecake recipes. So, and so I'm going to take some cheesecake.
Like across the bridge, because we go like, yeah, I go across the bridge.
Because that's
Round up at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
So how about you? Weekends with your family?
This weekend it was mostly because it was so hot.
You stayed
Stayed
in?
in.
Yeah.
We went out a little bit during the early day, but we were done by 11 a.m.
Oh.
Because even on Sunday.
Yeah.
Even on Sunday I think at 9 o'clock.
You'll find it.
That was a little bit of a breeze. Well, not on Friday. I wasn't here on Friday. Okay. Yeah. You get a little bit of a breeze.
Right here, yes. Yeah. Yeah. You probably do that.
Oh, yeah. Right. I've been meaning to state my defense. Here's how we had this thing. My one side of the fence will be staying, the other side of the fence will go. So, at some point I'm going to get it.
I was going to say,
Yeah, Toxicology.
No, I live on the corner. So it actually extends out to, yeah, it extends out to
Interior and the exterior.
They do know. Yeah. I'll get there at some point. I'm going to move this copy or else I'm not going to sleep at all.
Seems I'll put it in first. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'll put that in. Yeah, sure.
You need a little Pilates session. We're going to be sitting here this long.
Yeah. Tai Chi in between.
Right. In your yoga mat, I won't blame you.
Yeah. I do a lot of stretching. That acupuncture.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That never worked for me.
Oh.
I did a couple of sessions and just
Helped me.
does it. Well,
Yeah.
good for you.
Yeah.
All right, it looks like we're all reseated, and we'll continue on with agenda number 5, operating budget overview, our strong infrastructure and community parks directions. This is directional and informational again. Assistant City Manager Woulf will continue on.
Assistant.
I said assistant.
Oh, good. I said,
I
running out giving news or something.
I said assistant, did I not? Okay.
Might have been a little quiet.
I don't want that crown. Thank you very much. All right. I am joined by some more friends up here. We have, I'd like to reintroduce this evening Maria DeAndrea, our new Public Works Director, whom was introduced last week.
Welcome again.
She will be talking to you a little bit about her background and kind of her hopes and dreams for the department here in a moment. I did want to give you just a general overview, since we're moving into the operating budget side of things now, in how to expect our departments to present to you over the course of this evening and then the 25th. We had a team-based approach internally. Again, just try to build the best budget as possible to give us a much more intentional view in creating both our capital and our operating budget. As I said, we tried to orient around the community goals, and now that you have 6 that you've said, hey, we'd like to try to move forward on these, we're trying to at least organize the programs, our operating programs, around those goals, just so that you and the community can see what we're doing and try to advance those. And so we'll be a little bit back and forth, but hopefully you understand that that's from the perspective of trying to give you the best picture of each goal, give you the best idea of our challenges, and a snapshot of some of our programs as we're considering the 2019 budget. As a reminder, you know your 6 goals, but we'll be going through all of them. Fiscal sustainability is really infused into everything, so we're not talking specifically about operating programs that directly relate to fiscal sustainability, but no, basically Kathy's entire department is oriented that way, and everything that we're talking about in planning for capital projects and everything we do for our operations is based in that. The other 5, we'll go through in that order. Tonight we'll be talking about strong infrastructure and community parks. Obviously there's a relationship to the capital budget. We'll be giving you a little bit of information as how the operating side of the budget relates to our capital improvement plan. And for each, we've tried to outline how we've been looking at each of these goals, trying to glean information from you into how you and the community are looking at each of these goals. And so for each of the goals, we've outlined a little bit of what we thought is a vision for advancing or moving towards these goals. At this point, I'd like to hand off to Maria, who will give you a little bit more information on kind of her background and her vision for the department.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And Mayor and City Council.
Yes,
Well, thank
welcome.
you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. just a little bit of background about me. I am a professional engineer. About 24 years of municipal experience. First as a city engineer for 2 first-ring suburbs outside of Minneapolis. Grew up in Minnesota and moved out here about 12 years ago.
Good stock.
Yes.
Good place to move here too.
Yep. So I worked first for the town of Castle Rock. I transitioned when I came out here more into the public works from the city, or from the engineering side of things. So I worked as the assistant director at Castle Rock for about 6 years, and then for Jefferson County as their traffic and transportation engineer for a couple of years, and then just most recently as the director of public works for Commerce City for about just under 5 years. So that's my background. My 4 areas of focus, as I've talked with Eric and Mark, are really focus on asset management. So I look at it as a cycle. So we plan. Well, we inventory. We know what we have, get our arms around that. So we focus on planning, design, construction, maintenance, and then starting all over again. And really knowing what we have and what we have to take care of. Also about project delivery, so being on time, on budget, and to a high level of quality in how we deliver projects. Establishing levels of service, making sure we report back on those. And then finally, regional partnerships and collaboration. So it's hard to do these projects alone. It's hard to do things individually, and really takes reaching out to other communities, other agencies such as CDOT, RTD, that sort of thing, to really work together and deliver projects and efforts. So that's my focus going into this. So thank you, and thank you for making me feel so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we are really excited to have Maria on board. So you'll be hearing from her throughout these presentations, knowing that she's had, about a week to get oriented?
The fire, huh?
I can relate.
You have some sympathy on the side of her.
For each of these goal areas, we'd also like to try to base it in some type of reality. So what we thought would be helpful for each of these presentations is just a quick snapshot on some of the relevant results from the citizen survey. And so since it's so fresh, overall ease of getting the places, so transit focus, the different modes of transportation, above the national average for comparable communities. Sense of community, I think, is in need of a little bit of improvement in my eyes. The quality of city parks, very high, at 3/4 at excellent or good. And the quality of street repair, again, another area where perhaps we need to focus on. There's many others that you could pick out, but those I thought were germane to our discussion this evening. Some of our major activities as it relates to the operating side of infrastructure and parks is really looking at our assets and our maintenance programs overall. We do that with our facilities, so not some of the major projects like our roof reconstruction, but you're talking about looking at general maintenance of our buildings, looking at anything from cleaning carpets to some of our other minor improvements, replacing towel dispensers, whatever it might be. Parks are the same, where you hear about the big ticket items, the grants we try to receive for major equipment replacement, major park improvements, but there's a whole other side, which is the day-to-day maintenance that's baked into our operations. Tom will talk to you a little bit more about how water, and how I think it's a good example on how we look at the difference between kind of that asset reinvigoration and then capital projects, major capital projects.
Yeah. We break projects down into 2 categories. Capital projects, which we consider new, additional treatment, a new building. The other and big component is asset maintenance. And I'll use the example again of the water plant. It's a heavy mechanical facility, so our operating budget every year includes pump replacements, motor replacements, media change out on our filters, electrical upgrades. That's our asset management. And I just picked 3 big ones right here off of it. Water distribution valve replacement. We've got north of 2,100 valves. And like everything, they wear out, so this summer we're going to be replacing about 50 to 60 valves system-wide. Water plant asset replacement, as I referred to, that's when we'll be doing our pumps, our motors, our variable frequency drives. And finally, Meadow Creek Reservoir improvements. We're part owner of Reservoir outside of Fraser, and in 19 we are going to be upgrading flumes. Flumes are measuring devices. They're required by our permit with the Forest Service because we collect water from 6 creeks that come into it, and we're going to replace all the flumes on those 6 creeks for recording purposes. And we're considering all of that asset management because they exist today. It's asset management I look at as the cost of doing business.
All right, and now moving into a few, again, specific topics that we've highlighted are either challenges or some of our major cost drivers on the operating side of infrastructure and parks.
Hello again. I'm Blair with the South Platte Water Renewal Partners. I want to introduce Kirk Carson. He's our Deputy Director of O&M Solutions, so he's going to be helping me with this short presentation here. So this first slide I put up there, nationwide capital expenditures for municipal water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure will exceed $683 billion over the next decade. This was projected by Bluefield Research, who looks into that, and I don't put that up there to scare you. I put that up there to say we're not, everyone's experiencing this. Everyone's experiencing this crunch of needing to replace old assets, also while having these regulations tighten up and having to build new assets. So, Metro Wastewater, which is the biggest plant in the state, just built a northern treatment plant for about $417 million to address this, nutrient treatment, and so they've invested that. South Adams County, where I came from, they put in $22 million to upgrade their existing plant to meet these nitrogen and phosphorus limitations. So we're not by any means alone. It's a local issue and it's a national issue industry wide that's really caused by the plants were built after the Clean Water Act passed in '72. I may be getting off on a tangent here, but Clean Water Act passed in '72. All these plants were built, so our infrastructure is from the '80s, from the '90s, from the 2000s. And when we get into 2018, that's 20-year-old equipment that needs continually upgraded. So that's kind of where we're coming from. What we're looking from the council to provide is kind of direction. We're trying to go to a more proactive approach. I mentioned the car analogy of getting your oil changed. So we're trying to do that plant-wide, of stay on the side of proactivity rather than being reactive to equipment failures or regulatory needs. We want to look out, see what's coming, and make sure we're positioned to meet those. Another area we're looking for input is kind of a lot of this technology, and Kirk can speak to this during his slide, but a lot of it you can invest less at the front and then have a chemical solution that takes a lot of maintenance and a lot of money to upkeep over the next 20 years, or you can invest a lot early on and do it that way. So we're looking for kind of input from the council on where that line is. We have our ideas, and we want to get your ideas on that as well. So how do we do it? How do we, Tom explained how he does it. We take a little different approach, but it's all existing assets versus new infrastructure that we need. So we have a process piece of it. Our enterprise asset management system is a computerized system where we house data and analytics and information on, asset age, asset lifespan, projected lifespan, asset condition, criticality, and we can run analytics from that database. So if we put a pump in 1995 and it said it had a 20-year projected lifespan, we know around 2015 we need to start looking at it a little closer and seeing what we need to replace. So that's the system piece of it. The next is the people piece, where we have operator condition assessments. We have professionals, either operators, engineers, safety professionals going out into the system evaluate. And, asset management can tell you a lot, but you need someone to go out there and check the system and look for things that could cause safety violations. And so we have continual assessment at that. We've even gone so far to build a continuous improvement program to teach our employees, how to better find efficiencies and better track these and recognize these throughout the plant. So we have the people piece, and then we have the strategic operations plan, which is kind of that regulatory piece. What are we going to need to meet Reg 85? What are we going to need to meet Reg 31? So when you combine those, out falls the capital needs. I mean, it's not, I'm kind of making it sound simple, but that's how we do it. So your capital needs come from that combination of what do the regs say, what's our existing assets that we need replaced, and what are our people telling us. So
does Dave Robbins know you stole his funnel?
Was that Dave's? I didn't know. Maybe he stole my funnel. So I'll turn it over to Kurt now, and he can talk a little bit more about our assets.
Thank you, Blair. Good evening, Council and Mayor Olson. My name is Kurt. I'm the Deputy Director of O&M. I'm also a professional engineer. I've been in this industry for about 7 years. I worked primarily at Metro Wastewater Reclamation District before I came here. I just want to talk through this slide real quick. In my mind, the big expenditures we're seeing on the horizon now kind of come in two flavors. They come in the aging infrastructure variety, and they come in the capital improvements variety. We have a computerized maintenance management system that we do a lot of our data analytics in, where we understand what the useful service lives of these equipment systems are. We can watch the efficiency decline. We do as much preventative maintenance as we can. That system currently has 13,000 assets that we're tracking. The facility was built in the 70s, and the facility has underwent at least 3 major upgrades since then. The thing is, when the facility was originally built, they didn't build it to treat today's standards, and that's kind of where the second variety of these big capital expenditures are coming from. We got new regulations. As of December last year, we got a new discharge permit, and in that discharge permit, we are now going to be removing a pollutant from the water that we've never removed before. The treatment facility wasn't designed for it, and it's going to result in large investments needed to meet that. In addition to that, the target's already moving. We got the Reg 85 limits now, but we're looking down the line, kind of on the edge of our planning horizon, and we know that regulations are going to get more stringent then. The unique thing about Colorado is that there's not a lot of water around, and since we're an inland discharger, we have some of the most stringent regulations in the country, and we really are kind of in the area now where we're getting pushed to the limit of technology. And so as we go through this budgeting process, we're going to work diligently to bring the most accurate information we can to the council for approval, not only on what we need to keep the facility running, but also what we need to tackle some of these new regulations on the future. The one element that doesn't really get mentioned a lot is that the South Platte Water Renewal Partners is an enormous asset. I've heard estimations that it could be potentially about a $500 million new construction build equivalent. And so when you start thinking about that and all the assets, it is going to drive some large numbers. And, we were working diligently to apply as much science as we can to really make science-based decisions on what we need to do to improve the facility and keep us going. Outside of that, I think...
we'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Member Barrington.
Could you please, when we do the joint meeting, could you please provide the information for what the upgrade, the expansion of the plant that I mentioned before with financing was $168 million. It's not even 10 years old. So could you just go ahead and, for that presentation, make sure that you have how that expansion, if at all, it addressed any of those issues that you've got listed there. And where did you used to work?
Metro Wastewater Reclamation District.
You said it so fast. I was
Denver.
like, I've never heard of it. I heard of that one. And then remove what new?
We have a phosphorus limit.
Oh, okay, because you were making it sound scary, like we're removing something new we never had to remove before, and I was like, oh, what is it? And so thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate it. So if you could just provide that as it addresses these issues that you're looking potentially for funding for. Thank you.
And we are looking through our SOP, our strategic operating plan, at how to leverage our current infrastructure, to meet these new regulations. So turning hydraulic capacity into treatment capacity is part of the SOP. So we'll address that.
I appreciate that, but it's nice to just apples to apples, so we know what the 168 million addressed and was looking at 10 years ago, and where we're at. Because if we're still having problems or we didn't address it properly 10 years ago, then we need to make sure that how we're planning this and strategically looking at the future, so that every 10 years we're not looking at some massive amount of money. And if we had any problems and it was addressed, why we were not seeing more than a 10-year life out of it. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Anyone want drinking water? Oh, sorry, Member Martinez, go ahead.
Thank you for being here tonight. At our joint council meeting, are you going to be looking for more specific direction as it relates to the phosphorus removal in terms of your sustainability versus initial investment discussion, your question?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We through that SOP, we'll show you what we have, and then we'll show you our recommended solution that's come out of there. But that's when we need to know, the value of sustainability to you all, and how much we should value that in our decisions.
Okay, great. Because I know you guys are doing some pretty cool things with, thinking through that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
That'll be great. Thank you. Be good to get drinking water.
Now upstream. Perpetual challenge.
Hopefully upstream.
Yeah. That was a good segue in. Phosphorus, that is one of the problems with our water quality right now. Urbanization, which is nutrient loading, gets organics in there. That's our taste and odor problems.
I think you need to turn the mic around.
Sorry. The lower flows create higher water temperatures, which just make a perfect growing environment. Next slide. To address water quality, which has been an issue for some time, as you can see here, in the late 90s we added flocculation sedimentation, which was an entire treatment process, in granular activated carbon filters, which is similar to the Brita pitcher on your counter. We've also blended, we have an excellent water portfolio, so we piped Bear Creek water from Mullen and got it into our plant, and we've also got City Ditch 3/4 of the way piped from Chatfield to the reservoir. Chatfield water is quite a bit better because it's settled water. It's from the bottom of it. What we pick up at Union Avenue, if you ever go down to the river on a nice hot day, it's getting to be some pretty rough stuff. But other things we've done is right at the river we added powder activated carbon that also absorbs the oils that are generated from the organics that are decomposing. We've also optimized our process at the plant, our filter backwashes, the filter replacements, and we've also refined our disinfection process. Moving forward in 19, we've got 3 big initiatives. We participated in the Chatfield reallocation project. What that is an environmental pool of water in Chatfield that'll maintain a base flow in the river. So that will help us with the extreme, we won't see the very extreme low flows coming down the river at Union Avenue. And we'll be completing the big Dry Creek project in 19. I know that's been moving along slowly. We're still waiting on 2 permits, but we are still moving forward. And the third one is going to help also, it's also at Union Avenue. We have a sedimentation pond there that has not been dredged in about 30 years. We're going to dredge that out, and we're going to add aeration. That aeration is going to be powered from the big Dry Creek diversion hydropower. And what that aeration is going to do, it's going to volatilize some of the organics in the water just by lifting it up into the air. It'll help. It's not a cure-all. All of these are steps to help us along the way.
Question, would the original dredging create some kind of a taste issue that we need to alert people to?
No, we will take it offline.
Okay.
Yep. So.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, let's move on to.
Oh, you got one.
Now, it's hard to see with.
So, if
Actually, the Big Dry Creek diversion was supposed to be major in changing the taste of the water.
The hardness,
The hardness of the water?
yes.
Not necessarily the taste?
No.
Okay.
We wish it
That's
could have
3 to
done
5
both.
years?
Big Dry Creek is about 3 times harder than the main body of the South Platte. And
Okay.
that comes in right above, our intake at Union.
So if we do all of these things, how are we going to know which one did it?
That's a good question. She's a
No,
good
I-
scientist.
I am serious. If you're doing them all at the same time, you won't know which one was the most effective.
Well, the Big Dry Creek will address hardness, and the dredging and aeration is going to address taste and odor.
Okay.
There are
Two
different
different
approaches for different things, but it's a good question to be.
Point of information, we're still looking at 3 to 5 years out for that, and for that, all of that,
The Dry Creek diversion?
yeah, for all of that
Hard water.
The
results
T-norms.
and the
Residuals?
residuals issue with the what is it called? The
T-norms. Yes, because that process reservoir, what we process in any given year, like in 18, what we put up there in 18 that we pull out in 19, that could be a blend of 16, 17, and 18. So, yes, to answer your question, it'll probably be about 3 to 5 years of bringing less radioactive
including the
water.
radiation for the residuals and all that, you're still looking at 3 to 5 years, so it'll be a long process.
Yeah.
Right, and all
An
3 of
ongoing
these,
process, yes.
all 3 of these will affect it. Okay, all right. Thank you for the clarification.
All right, no other questions?
This is your last chance for water and wastewater. All right.
It's not our last chance. They're
No.
coming back in July.
Just for tonight.
We're going to be at it again.
All right, we're going to have a little shift change over here. Margaret Brocklander, our IT Director, will be discussing IT infrastructure.
Oh, nothing's funner than wastewater. It's a hard act to follow.
So IT infrastructure, you may or may not be familiar with it. So one way to think of it is similar to public works infrastructure. Think about the roads and the highways and the bridges that you drove on to get to Civic Center tonight. So if you think of IT infrastructure in the same way, it is this equipment. It is the cables that come into our server room. It is our servers, our computers, our data center, our switches, our hubs, routers, everything that makes our IT infrastructure work. So that's the easiest way for me to sort of relate how IT infrastructure works. I know it's complicated, and a lot of people are like, IT infrastructure what? So hopefully that helps a little bit with describing what it is that we do and the equipment that we use to make all of the technology run. So our 2018 priority improvements, one of our highest priority improvements for this year is redesigning our network and our SAN for long-term sustainability. The current design of the network and the SAN doesn't promote for long-term. So we're undoing a lot of what's been done. We are moving servers off the SAN so it runs more effectively, and we get some of our SAN space back. We're also increasing the size of the SAN because we are at capacity. Other improvements we're making also align with, for newer council members, we did endure a ransomware attack in October. And we put together an after-action report, and a lot of the improvements that were identified included infrastructure improvements as well as security improvements. And this redesign and the cybersecurity improvements is getting us to the point where we need to be, so we are much more secure and our assets are more secure. The GIS enterprise implementation, this was a project first introduced to Council at the last budget session. This is taking the GIS system, Geographic Information System, from the local department, 5 licensed users, to an enterprise implementation. We just started this. We just hired a GIS administrator. We just got the software installed, so this project is just starting. The audiovisual improvements, this is improvements in Hampton Hall, City Council, as well as the community room. So far we've made some improvements in Hampton Hall, replacing the projector there. We also have plans to improve this with a projector and a screen. And I'm looking into better microphones after I'm watching Move the Microphone tonight. So we'll be looking into that.
Thank you.
So those are the priority improvements that we're currently working on today in 2018. Our 2019 preliminary plans for improvements include a print management program. So our current fleet of copiers, we have a 5-year contract that comes to an end at the end of this year, and our copiers no longer fit our needs. So we need to look at new copiers and a new print management program, whatever that may look like. We have not come to a conclusion yet. We are still investigating different options for that. But that will be coming back to you in the 2019 budget. We're also looking at fiber to city facilities. Quite a few of our facilities are not on the city's fiber system. So for 2019, we'd like to bring back a project to bring the police department onto the city's fiber network. And each year thereafter, adding additional public Inglewood facilities onto the fiber network. And then lastly is the broadband study. This study was introduced at the council strategic planning session. And if council passes the strategic plan for broadband, then we would like to bring back a request for a broadband study in 2019 so that we could go out and talk to, get public input. This fly is like I know. all over me today.
Building envelope issues.
You did say that. So we can get public input on that. So it is a broadband feasibility study.
And that obviously is subject to additional study and discussion long before we get to the point of study. But if that is a priority of council and identified in your strategic plan,
right,
we would certainly like to build that into the 2019 budget.
Yes.
Right. Are there questions? Councilmember Berentine?
Wasn't the fiber issue addressed with the new police building, or is that additional to it? You're making it sound as if it's additional.
It is additional. They are currently on the Comcast system.
But the new building, the $32 million building, wasn't that addressed with what they were doing for the building? I mean, along with chairs and desks and stuff, that we didn't do that?
No.
Can you explain, Margaret, what this fiber system, I think there's some confusion there.
So this is putting our own conduit and our own fiber into the ground and doing a direct fiber run from this building to the PD building. So we're on our own network.
Uh-huh. And is everything for the police station at least ready, upgraded to handle whatever it would need to handle?
Yes, they absolutely are.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. You heard of the IT-related roads and bridges, and now you get to hear about actual roads and bridges.
That was a segue. Great. So, yeah, just again, focusing on inventory, we have roughly right now around 120 centerline miles of streets and 15 bridges, which are greater than 20 feet in length. CDOT actually, ever since the bridge collapse in Minnesota, CDOT actually rates all the bridges for municipalities on a 3-year cycle. So, but they only do the ones over 20 feet in length, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Other things is we're talking about the road and bridge, how we manage that as a system is really looking at when we do road improvements, how we're looking at ADA upgrades to make those accessible for all people, as well as coordinating closely with the utility department so that we're not re-tearing up roads that have just been repaved, and private utilities as well. So Excel, Comcast, all those folks, how do we coordinate all of that together? So we did do kind of a, staff had commissioned a very quick kind of a very simplistic view, if you will, of where we are in the current condition assessment. And they talk about what's called remaining service life. So the average there is that they're saying that about 20% of the system, or let's say roughly 22 miles of roads, have a remaining service life of less than 6 years. It sounds quite dire. 66% of the roads have remaining service life between 6 and 10 years. And you can see how that graph there sort of has a bell curve. Of course, we would want that pushed a little bit further to the right so that we have some time to plan and work towards maintaining that. Ideally, you'd like to see that spread as evenly as possible so that you're maintaining on a consistent basis a certain number of roadway miles every single year.
Mayor Pro Tem has a question.
Do we have a current plan to replace so many streets every year, or have we not had a plan?
I think we do have a goal of a certain miles, but I think we wanted to take that to the next step, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, if you wouldn't mind.
All right.
Could I ask a question with that too? Is when you talk about the life, are you talking about the top all the way down? Because I know there's different layers that sometimes get replaced, and then it's fine and it's good for another so many years. Is this like is it like complete total decay?
Yes, when they talk about remaining service life, that means the entire pavement section.
Wow.
So but I think it's a little bit of misguidance is that you could still drive on it, but I think the intent is that the remaining service life, if it's 6 years, is that it's not worth putting preventative maintenance dollars into it at that point. So it's not like it's going to just blow up, or that we're going to experience major sinkholes or something, but that's the point where it would need to be rebuilt as opposed to just providing some sort of surface maintenance.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question? How accurate are we on these, the person that put together this data, how accurate are they with this remaining service life?
I haven't been able to study it in detail, but it was very quick and dirty. I would like to do a more in-depth study where they actually go out and rate every particular street segment and look at the existing defects or distresses on that particular pavement, and then they create what's called an overall condition index. It's a rating from 0 to 100. So let's say that's a 60 on a particular road. This next segment is a 40. This one's a 50. And they can give us an overall rating for our entire street segment. It would look like a graph somewhat similar to this, but I think an OCI, or overall condition index, is more what other communities use as a rating and then we can talk as a group, council can set direction. How well do you want your streets to be maintained at? Is that a 60? Is it a 70? And I can show you some pictures as to maybe what you want to do. And of course, then there's different dollar levels that go along with maintaining it at a 70 versus a 60, for example.
I think I was looking at it more in terms of like the historical assessment of it. So if this study was done in 2010 and they had an 8-year service life.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did something come up in 2018 where 32% of it did falter in 2018 or so?
This, I believe, was done in late 2016.
Okay.
Good question.
And some of what you may see, and I don't know the history with this, I know this happened in other cities, is that sometimes you see this graph with street reconstruction, kind of the snake that ate something large, if you will, is because what happens in economic downturn is that you end up deferring maintenance, and when streets get deferred, that remaining service life ends up bubbling up at the same time for more roads than you'd prefer. And so I don't know if that's the challenge right now, but that's what Maria is talking about, is how do we get to the point of, based on council policy direction, flatten that over time.
Okay, and this graphic talks a little bit more, and I'll go into more detail when we have more time, but the goal really is to move from more of a reactive system to more proactive. So ideally, you'd like to spend more of your maintenance dollars on preventative maintenance. So what we do right now, slurry seals, cape seals, those sort of things, where they're sealing the surface, they're not necessarily adding any structural strength, but they're protecting it from the environment, the water, rainwater, snow, and ice where they get in. That's what creates a lot of the potholes when that ice expands. And doing those surface seals really is a very cost-effective measure to seal out the oxidation from the sun as well as the rain and snow. So moving what that graph on the right shows is just sort of pictorial with the red is that if you reconstruct it, if the typical life is 20 years, you'd let the OCI there drop from 100 down to 20, reconstruct the road, and then go back up to 100 again. Instead, with the blue, if you're doing preventative maintenance, spending a little bit of money, you're keeping it at a higher OCI over that same time period and spending less dollars. So our proposal is that we would do a comprehensive pavement rating of all the streets, as I mentioned, based on that overall condition index. We'd like to have come back, show you those results, and then look for some direction on where do we want to set that in terms of a level of service. And then how do we work towards getting to that, and what kind of dollars would it take to maintain it at that level. Developing then also a comprehensive pavement management program, to your question, Mayor Pro Tem, is really looking at it on a system-wide basis. So how do we focus on preventative maintenance, and how do we move about the city? Because it also goes back to communication with the public, providing them with some consistency, working in a particular area instead of maybe jumping around. Really helps for people moving their vehicles, for garbage pickup, for all of those individual things as the work is concentrated in one area. Then also, as I talked about the bridges, we have a good inventory from CDOT on those structures that are more than 20 feet. But we want to look at those smaller bridges as well. And again, develop a comprehensive bridge maintenance and culvert rehabilitation program that we would bring back for you for consideration.
Any final questions on roads and bridges?
Member Barentine?
Please, I know it's only been a week, but when you come back to present this information, if we could have a little bit of history to Councilmember Sierra's point, I would like to go over what the previous plan was and how we were implementing that, and if we stopped at any time. We were, our roads, the condition of our roads and those assets played a huge piece in some things we were doing when I was on council before, between 2003 and 2007, in our rating. And we were rated really extremely high for the kind of process we were using and the condition of that infrastructure at that time. So I'd like to see what kind of plan they had in place and whether that was maintained throughout, or whether it kind of fell off during the recession piece of it. But a little history about what they were using and whether that changed or not, and what you'd like to see, what's working well in there, I guess, and what's not, as you're moving forward, what you'd like to keep. Also, a little bit more information on the OCI, the overall condition index, how much you believe that's going to cost, and what kind of benefits you think that is, rather than just segmenting it out, and the kind of process that they're using now, whether that's on some kind of grid formula and not assessing it, or how you think we're going to get payback off of that, and about the timeline for that as well, and how that'll be integrated, because I really think that's important when we're going forward with the budget, on how we're going to evaluate that, because I think that's important.
Certainly. Other questions? Member Wink?
Thank you. Just a small note in addition to what Member Barentine just asked for. In addition to an understanding of the cost of the assessments that we talked about, maybe I'd be interested in knowing the resources involved, human and non-human, and just where those costs, how they align with time spent and the team you have. Thank you.
Oops. Right, and I would like to add one in. I think with the changes, the thinking about the OCI is compared to what we've been currently doing. Any other technologies that have changed over time? Remember, Barentine's asking for a historical view. I think, at least I remember, changes along the way that ways in which we do our roads or different approaches and what those are and what the new standards are that can make it a little bit less expensive but better resources, maybe even to make the roads sturdier, and different materials that are now being used that maybe were not used 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if there are. And I don't know if I should ask for this or not. Do we want to see the ratings of these bridges? A, B, C, D, F, is that how they still rate them?
No, they're also on a scale rating, and they're either structurally deficient or functionally obsolete, which sounds a little scary, but actually I've looked at the list and it's not bad. So I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, well, at some point probably should take a look at that to know exactly which ones are the worst and how bad they are. Member Barentine has one more.
I just wanted to get the information from CDOT. I know we've been working with them, like on the Santa Fe corridor. I don't know when that information is coming back. I know, like the Oxford and Windermere area, there's been arguments from people having accidents on their bikes from the corridor there. Whose is that? Whose crumbling curbs are those? Are those the railroads? Are those CDOT's? Is that Inglewood's responsibility? And we've had 2 sinkholes in that area, the one on off of Dave and Buster's, which is now some other thing, and then the one that's on the Martin Plastics property. We had another one. So it's just kind of that area. I don't know whether there's something else going on with that. So if we could kind of, has been requested before, just if there's anything that's really something that's kind of dangerous and exactly where we are with CDOT on working with this.
Okay. Right. Council, we're at a little after 9, and we have one more item here in this presentation, and then the results of the prioritization. Are we willing to go on? We also have council member choice, and I'm sure there's a couple of things that are going to come up there.
Let's do it.
What's your tolerance for time right now?
Sure.
I'm good.
You got enough energy? Okay. Do you? Keep
Always.
moving. Keep moving.
Let's get through it.
All right, and another idea that we're throwing out for council consideration is looking at the possibility of investigating further a single source garbage and recycling collection program. Obviously right now, individual property owners and businesses contract with a number of providers, and then they're free to choose who they collect with. But then recycling becomes optional, so you oftentimes have to pay extra for that, or it's a hassle to get the little bins, and it deters people from recycling. And so I think, although there's probably some cons as well, we think that there's a number of benefits that make this worthy for additional consideration. Many of those being less damage to the streets and alleys. So what we just talked about, if you have just one garbage or possibly one garbage and one recycling truck going down the street each week, as opposed to multiple picking up at different houses. Of course, then it also becomes much more efficient if you're picking up every house on the block as opposed to just one here and one there. And so, or if you're going down the alley to do that. And what that results in is a lower cost. So if we're going out and getting one contract for everybody, of course it makes it more efficient for the garbage collector, and so forth they can pass those costs on to the city. And then hopefully, that if the city was to implement some type of program like that, is we could incentivize recycling, provide recycling carts, and then possibly through those programs increase recycling and also drop our garbage volume, which again helps for those overall costs. And then, of course, more aesthetically pleasing. Instead of having the trucks out or, the bins out on different days, they're out on one day, hopefully, and then everybody takes them back into the garage or pulls them at least off the street.
Right. Member Wink, and then Member Martinez, and then Mayor Pro Tem.
Regarding businesses or commercial use of the single hauler service, do we have any history in terms of council or city leadership having conferred with businesses in terms of their thoughts on that?
not here in Inglewood. Typically, what transpires when you move to that, it's done for your residential customers only. Commercial customers still have the ability to select whom they want to utilize, again, because they're adjacent to infrastructure that's built to probably accommodate those trucks. This particular issue has been brought up by two of our boards and commissions. First, ETAC and Transportation Advisory, and then also Keep Inglewood Beautiful has raised it. And so, and now with the new Public Works Director looking at our community, this is where this is rising.
Great, thank you.
Member Martinez?
Thank you. I was going to say the same thing.
Sorry.
No, it's totally fine. It has come up several times with Transportation Advisory and Keep Inglewood Beautiful and citizens coming to those groups asking about it. I actually got an email from a resident asking about it today. So I'm glad we're taking a look at it. How do you know offhand how many companies are allowed to perform this task in the city now? It's quite a few. I know it's like at least 5 or
11.
I think
11.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what days of the week are they allowed to come?
Monday and Wednesday.
It seems like it's more than that, but
It's Monday and Wednesday by law.
I see them every day.
However, people
I see them a lot more than that too. Yeah.
I walk 3 miles a day, and I see them all over the place almost every day, and I can
Me
never
too.
figure out if it's just that they've left it out and it's sitting there, or whether there's actually something coming. So that also happens. So it might seem like they're on several days, but I think some people just leave their trash cans out too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think Mayor Cook had.
And that was my point is, really by code, it is only supposed to be 1 or 2 days. So it's gonna save on the number of trucks. I've gotten a lot of calls already just by this being on the agenda.
Good.
Yeah, they don't want it.
Lots of public input.
Lots of
we'll
people
have. I think it's time to test the waters on this one again, because there's a groundswell both for and against, and it'll be good to get it settled again.
Yep. So there are several communities already providing this, so I think there's some good experience that we can draw from if we do want to move forward. And then, again...
Did she finish up and then...
Oh, I'm sorry. The rest of the people got to be
I am
recognized.
sorry. I missed you again. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't think it's on purpose. The 11 companies currently right now, the reason that we have 11 companies is because they pay a fee, don't they?
They get a permit.
So we get permitting fees from each company that comes in, and so we do make some money that way. And I think anytime we're taking a consumer decision away from our constituency, we need to make sure that we tread very carefully. I was not on council when this got brought up before, but I had just moved into Inglewood when this got brought up before. And if you want to see your constituents, it's a good way for them to get involved, because there were a lot of constituents and they were very involved with this. The other cities, when I went back and looked at them, if you could give a little bit more information when you come and bring this issue forward about whether those are city employees or whether they, with their own equipment that they own,
Yes.
is
It's
huge.
that's
would be very
definitely a
expensive.
variety, of
When-
methods.
When you say that the city can incentivize something, we rarely incentivize. We make laws and we enforce things. So I'd like a little bit better definition on what you think incentivize is, because in each one of these communities, I wouldn't call what they're doing to the people who don't do this incentivizing, but maybe there's something different that I don't know about, so if you could bring forward some of that information as well. And then if you could do just a little bit of history, I know it was a little bit ago, but if you could do a little bit of history when this was brought back up again before. Generally, when this goes through a city effort like that, they kind of include like recycling, and all of this stuff has to be there, and you've got plant cheese, compost, so much. So if you kind of do the mix of what all they require in there as well, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Member Barentine, sorry for not acknowledging, but can you start then with just telling us whether you want us to continue to pursue this effort? It sounds like
No.
you want.
No.
Is that what they're wanting?
I am very much a free market woman. I think there are an awful lot of facilities and companies that have several trucks. We have UPS, we have the United States Postal Service. I see 4 or 5, 6 different oxygen companies that come up and down and use our roads. I think that we ought to try to look at pushing back and making sure that when you have an alley that we can get some alley pickup. But I think people really enjoy the fact that they have that freedom and the competition. Once we do this, and what's happened in some of these cities as well, is that it becomes a monopoly, and the only people that they care about placating is city council, not their consumers anymore, because they have a contract with the city and not them. So that's a huge a bite back from people. And in several of these cities, you have quite a few people who, when they get disgusted or have a problem with the service that's going through the contract, they go ahead and pay the required company and then also pay another service because they get upset with what's going on and they don't feel that they're being heard. So I think anytime you're taking away a consumer thing, so I am not interested in it.
So your answer is no. Member Sierra?
I'm sorry, were you only looking for a yes or no?
Well, you want to know, continue to pursue this effort or not? And I'm just trying to get a sense for whether people want it. You were asking her to bring back information.
I thought that's what she was saying, was she was going to bring back some other information. But if we're deciding having some feedback now.
Yeah, I think, are you asking for some general feedback?
Yes.
That's what I get from these 2 questions here. So that's
I think we acknowledge that it's a controversial initiative. This is included in your draft strategic plan. That's why it's being brought as a suggestion for 2019. This is not a staff-led effort. So we are happy to support you if there is consensus to bring back all of that information. I think that would be helpful. If it's not, we certainly won't include it as a part of the 2019 budget proposal.
Okay, thank you. Member Sierra?
I'm open to just doing the due diligence on finding a single provider. Obviously, when you look at the operators, there is a big cost difference to the residents. So it does have to make sense in terms of what the cost would be to each resident on a monthly basis, especially when we're talking about all the other things that we're talking about in terms of infrastructure improvements and potentially having to pay for that. So all these things add up. So I definitely want to look at it, just do the due diligence on it at this point.
Member Wink?
I would like us to continue to pursue this effort.
Member Martinez?
I would as well, particularly because the 2 boards and commissions I work on have brought it up several times, and residents have brought it to them. So I think it's worth pursuing, looking at the option. Of course, it will be controversial and it will be heated, and people will be passionate one way or the other. But I think we need to do some more research, see if it makes sense.
I certainly would agree with generally the free market approach and neighbors being able to pick who they want as carriers. It sounds like we're going down the road of more information regardless, so I'll certainly hear out the rest of the information.
So you're willing to entertain some more time on this?
You bet. Sure.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
In all fairness, you may be able to get the cost somewhat less expensive. We still have to remember that we have a pretty substantial senior citizen population in this city. You can get trash pickup for a lot less as a senior citizen when you do not generate as much trash as younger people, and therefore I am totally about people being able to choose. If we have problems, I know that the city of Denver, I don't know about the rest of them, the city of Denver has their own trash trucks, they have their own employees, they pick it up, and actually it is actually charged to your property tax rather than you being billed. I think that is going to end up, if we did that route, it's going to end up costing us a lot more money than if the city hires someone to do it. And then what is the average citizen? If I have trouble with my trash man, I call them. I didn't get picked up today. What am I going to do if they miss my trash? Do I call the city? What do I do? And if I get upset with my trash company, I call somebody else, hire somebody else. So I'm more for the free market, but we can pursue this. I don't think it's a wise thing.
clearly there are a lot of things that are going to come out in this process, so especially those kinds of examples. I hear the opposite as well from people. I hear it on both sides, but I'm in favor of finding out more and doing due diligence, if anything, to protect our infrastructure as well as to provide our citizens even better service with lower costs, which would be an ultimate piece for me, free market aside. It's a free market to bid on it. It's a free market to get a bid and then carry it through. So I'm in favor, so let's move forward with it.
Go ahead.
As a point of information, the fee was mentioned that the current haulers pay. What is that fee, City Manager Keck?
Very low. I think it's, actually, I thought it was 150, but I just looked and it said 60.
Not much.
60 for
A permit. So you basically are getting a business license.
And the weight stuff.
Thank you.
We'll discuss a very intentional process in bringing this back.
We've
providing
made it
information.
through this part. I think we're done with the questions because we've taken it as we've gone, right? So we've got
Yes.
the kind of direction and information we all have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the thoughtful discussion. We will be bringing back the 4 remaining operating budget goal areas at the next full study session on the 25th.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda number 5, results of prioritization. We're all waiting with bated breath of our council strategic plan, and this is for direction and information again. Assistant Manager, City Manager Woulf will be present and is present to help us walk through.
All right, so I can take as little or as much time as you'd like. So a few caveats to this right off the bat. I have 5 out of 7. Yeah, that's it, Zeke. Thank you. I have 5 out of 7 included in this information, council members' responses. 1 was by instruction. Council member Sierra had a number of questions, obviously limited context for kind of some of the phrases and where we got some of the language. So he scored some of them, didn't score others, and so certainly that could help guide some of the future discussion is to answer those questions that some of you might be having.
Just
I know
for
that
full disclosure,
many,
who else did not fill this out?
I talked to Assistant City Manager Mark Woulf, and my mother being in the hospital and then cutting my Comcast line, which made it so that I didn't have that. But thanks for asking who the other person was. I appreciate that.
so with those caveats, it's not full results, so I can certainly bring it back. Councilmember Sierra did score some of them, but I didn't want to have zeros
That's
in there.
helpful to know because then we're not. Yeah.
Results. So there's your caveat.
The side of the table hasn't chimed in yet, but we're ready to.
There'll be plenty of time.
About 5 of 7 of you want to march for? No, I'm kidding. All right, so strategic objectives were scored on the 3 different matrices, just so everybody sees the same stuff. So this isn't scoring based off of what's my score out of 10 as how important this is. You were scoring them on these 3 areas: effort and cost versus impact, the availability of resources versus urgency, and then kind of that risk assessment was the last one. Maximum possible score is 9, so the higher the score is at a 9, the higher theoretically is a priority of this council. And that there are several unanswered questions. I know a few of you talked to me as well outside of Councilmember Sierra that said, well, what if I don't really know? We had this discussion at the last council meeting. Well, wouldn't staff be able to help us identify whether or not we have the resources available? So with all of those caveats, there may be several questions, and we can talk about how to proceed. Based on your current results, again, with those caveats, here is where the averages kind of fell. You want to hold yourself accountable for organizational excellence, which is certainly a partnership. We also talked about capital projects at length. Certainly that fell high on the list in funding. Police and looking at what a well-resourced department is and those strategies therefore. Looking at, again, probably getting some future guidance on what a comprehensive emergency program is, but that landed on your top 10, as well as looking at a centralized point of contact for city services. So those are based off of averages, what landed in your top 10. And just so you can see the other side of the coin, the bottom 10, so to speak, knowing that these are 35 or 34 or 5 priorities that you all listed as in your strategic plan. So they're the bottom 10 of those 35, but if they're on the list, they would be important as identified by this council. So I just wanted to put that caveat on it. And so you can read through those. in perhaps what might be of lower impact or what might not be as risky to pursue, but based on those criteria fell lower on your list. So, again, I apologize for it being so brief. This is the last slide, but I can provide you the full results and give Councilmember Barentine a chance to weigh in. We can either work through as a group some of Councilmember Sierra's questions. We're happy also to sit down. I know we're putting together a brief orientation similar to what you all went through about 8 months ago. So maybe some of those questions will get answered then and allow him the chance to rescore. I know many of you probably have questions in general, so I think in general looking for some guidance on how to bring this back to you in some meaningful way, knowing that it is related to the development of the budget.
In all fairness, I appreciate your offering that. But I think this has been gone over so much that I really don't need that opportunity. I think what I need more is the opportunity of how we're going to actually apply this instead of keep doing the matrix and score and stuff. So I think moving forward on that limited stuff is fine. I don't need another opportunity for that. So if you were worried about that, please don't.
Member Sierra, would you like some more time to weigh in on it too? Do you think, what are your interests and needs for this?
So when I went through this, I did go through, and when I spoke to Mark about it, the majority of the items that I was able to mark out with were the items that I had a lot of familiarity with, and also just found them to be a little bit more urgent than some of the others. So when I went through the list, a lot of them were pretty broad in scope, and so I decided to either just write a comment about it, that type of thing. So I think I can definitely get it done. So it shouldn't be that, but I can definitely work with Mark to get a little bit more understanding of what some of these questions may mean.
It's a big thing to jump into since we spent a whole day with these priorities and we kind of heard each other, mull things around, and
several times.
Right.
So thank you for being willing to still weigh in. What do you need from us? Next steps?
I think in how to use that data, so you have some idea on where these are falling in terms of prioritization. I think we need to know how you'd like to use the document. I know that we discussed it's a working document. It's not going to bind you. It's not like you're adopting ordinance. But if you do approve the strategic plan in some way, I think you saw tonight examples of how we would use that to budget. And so the broadband study was one, roads and bridges are another, prioritization of capital projects, the single hauler trash, all of those, if they're mentioned here, we're taking the cue from you that they're top priorities. If they are top priorities and you approve them or affirm them in some way, it gives us the ability to try to react to that. Certainly, we don't have to do it that formally. We can just know that you've worked on it together and you have a document that you generally agree is a decent starting place, and just use it as a guide as we're trying to do. But the more guidance we get, the stronger guidance we get on how you'd like to use this document, it helps us budget more accurately.
Very quickly, could each of us weigh in on that with brief statements on whether you want us to use it further than what we've done so far, or in his options? I don't know, and you can pass if you don't have an opinion, but Member Wink, I don't know if you want to weigh in on how you want to use it.
I'm not sure at this point, but I do feel we put some work into it, and there is some benefit there, so I'd rather not just toss it.
Put it away.
Yeah.
I also would prefer it not sit on the shelf. I think we should revisit it from time to time, and also at some point through our discussions, put some maybe metrics around these or goals or how we're going to decide if we're on the right track with some of these things or not. And with that too, I would like to share these with the boards and commissions that I'm a part of. A lot of things that they're working on are related to some of these initiatives, so I just want to make sure it's okay if they go forward working towards this, even if they're towards the bottom of our list.
Member Quester?
Even for referential purposes, it seems worthy to keep it around. Even if you're in there, we say, where did that land again in our priorities, which might be totally different 6 months from now, a year from now, but it might not hurt, I think, to just keep it handy to reference it.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I think it would be good for council to have a copy of the averaging that you did.
Absolutely.
And is it usable in the form you have now in helping with the budget? I mean, prioritizing the budget.
Yes and no. There are certain that I don't mean to be flip about it. There are certain things absolutely are very helpful that give us guidance. There's others, as Councilmember Sierra pointed out, that are so broad. I think we'd have to bring back for discussion on how the council would like to proceed. For instance, one of the top ones is to address our vulnerable populations, to create a plan. There's many vulnerable populations, and so how would you like to proceed on that would be the first question, I think.
Or defining what vulnerable population means.
Absolutely, and that could be as simple as a discussion with the mayor and the mayor pro tem and saying, we'd actually like to set for study session some of these topics that are more broad, or we'd like to at least discuss the items that have budget implications for 19 before we get into the full budget consideration. I think that would be really helpful, and that's how you can start to specify in greater detail.
Are you asking not only just for this, but all the other data that was put into? Is that what you're asking for?
Actually, I'm just asking, I have all the data that we did, but just that sheet where you have them all broken out by the average.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
I can give you the raw data.
The raw data is what you're asking for not just the top 10, bottom 10, but
yes, all the.
I was just making sure that's what it was.
And so perhaps a place to start is to look at that top 10 or so and start working down that list on how you'd like to proceed on those.
Okay,
those
so if we
topics.
got the raw data and the top 10 also.
Yep.
Okay.
I found this really helpful already. I was really curious.
Good.
So if we're all sort of resonating with those top 10, top 15, I think it'll have an influence on how, and I hope it would have an influence for you all in realizing if we all resonate with these, but we probably need another session to look at them. Is anything weird here that you didn't expect to be there? Because it looks fairly hefty at the scores you gave, that many of us out of the 5 at least, and
right, and certainly maybe a way to proceed is to spend a little time either next week or the week after just giving you some suggestions on how we think you'd like to move forward in those top areas, some of which we're already doing and some of which we're not, but maybe that'll give you some feel behind what the action steps are behind the plan.
Member Barentine, any more comments on this?
I think it's good as a guideline, but I think that it's quite different what it came back as than from the day that we spent together. And I think if we spent another day together, we'd come up with another, and it'd all be kind of different. So the more we spend analyzing the list of our, prioritizing this and not implementing anything and see whether it's a useful tool, I think we're kind of spinning our wheels and it'll just keep changing. So if we could just start using it as a guideline and a reference, we can wrap our heads around whether this is a useful tool or not, but we haven't done that yet. And this is coming back. When I saw this in the packet, it's coming back much different than I remember a lot of the conversations on that day, and I imagine next week it could be a lot different. So if we don't start utilizing it all we are studying things, and I don't want to waste this time and energy that we put in. So,
Member Sierra, any further comments?
I think I'm going to get some clarity when I do meet with the assistant city manager on this. I do see we had the objectives, and then we have processes underneath that, which some are on here are processes, and under that we have tools, which some on here are also tools. So I don't know. I think we can definitely make use of it at some point. Like one example here, like improve water quality. We had 3 examples today of how we're going to improve the water. So we've identified those ways to get to that process. So I think it definitely would help, though. We just clean it up a little bit.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully you've got enough information to go on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right. Thank you. Next is council members' choice. Who would like to begin? Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. A couple things. I would like to see if council would be interested in having a future study session topic on our wish list of topics about the area of invitation around which letters are sent for planned unit developments. I know right now it's 1,000 feet. I would like us to look and see if it should be expanded. there's just that. Also had a meeting with the Culture Arts Commission last week. It was really great. Just want to give you a couple of updates there. We had 2 business owners come who are interested in working on a mural for their business. So I'll talk to you about that later. Excited about that. It's Farmhouse Tap on the 4300 block of Broadway. And also they're working on something pretty cool, which they haven't done before, is a kind of an inventory of maintenance for all of the art that we currently own. So they've contracted with somebody to take a look at the existing pieces and where they are in different stages of maintenance and what it's going to look like long term to provide for each of those pieces of art. So once we get that finalized, I'll share that with council. It was really interesting, really kind of neat to have an inventory of all those pieces. We've never taken a look at the art in that way, so it was pretty cool to take a look at that. Also, we had a couple members go to the Colorado Creative Industry Summit report, and they reported back some really interesting, fun findings that other cities are doing. Also have KEB and ETAC meetings this week, so looking forward to that. And one final thing on the school district, just want to say that the relationship with the school district and council is extremely important. And it's also really important to me as a council person, as an individual. And we had some sort of miscommunications or misunderstandings relating to safety in our emergency management plan, and I think we've worked that out. So I think going forward, if we just continue our subcommittee meetings and anything that this group thinks that should be brought up during those meetings, if we could decide on if those should go through the city manager or one of the liaisons, I think that would just clear up any future miscommunications. And I'm committed to strengthening this partnership going forward and looking forward to working with them. And that's all for me.
Right. Which way do you want to go? Member Cuesta, Member Wink?
Sure. The primary one I have regards the South Platte River and the boundaries of what the river are. This has come up a couple times, I think primarily regarding the folks that were camping down there, and then we have a sweep and got it pretty cleaned up. I've had a few neighbors report that it seems to be getting back into a state of disrepair, which I'm sure is going to be an ongoing struggle with that particular area. Have we defined yet where our points of responsibility lie and where whatever that surrounding city's points of responsibility lie?
Yeah, thanks for raising that. And I've been I should have been bringing this back to the council, let them know. We are actually working with a title company right now to look at ownership of the river and specifically the property adjacent. So Public Works, and specifically one of our project managers there, is looking at working with a title company to see where ownership is, basically from Sheridan to the Denver border, which is on South Platte River Drive. And you're right, we monitor this very closely. The encampment is just basically right over the border in Denver, but it could easily come back into Inglewood. And so until such time as we can define what we own and what we don't, or who actually owns that land adjacent to the river, that's going to be problematic. But we are hopeful that through title work and some additional analysis of the river and how it's changed over time to get that ownership. I don't have a definite timeline for when we're going to receive that back. I just know that we're working with the Public Works is working with a company right now to look at that.
Sure. Thank you. And I know that Councilmember Barentine raised the issue last time that we at least have postings of no camping in certain sites throughout the city. I believe Parker this past week, I've saved the article, I haven't read it yet, but Parker just passed a no camping ordinance as well. And so I'm curious to see how they approached it. And not to say that that's something Inglewood should adopt, but I guess they ran headlong into the ACLU challenge and threw down the camping ban to see what happens. So thank you, I appreciate it. And I do think that's an issue that probably should remain on the radar as we kind of figure out that boundary and then how we want to approach it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor Wilson.
Tom Russell?
I have nothing this evening.
Go back to Councilmember Wink.
No report.
Nothing to report tonight.
Member Barentine?
I agree with what Amy brought up about expanding the notice for the PUD. I was at first somewhat thrilled with what was going on with the PUD, but that got brought up quite a bit, that it wanted to be expanded. And I think when you have such a large project area like that, that maybe we should expand it. Some people were surprised that Littleton was included in that. It is how many feet from the perimeter, and that goes for us with the Chang property on Bellevue. It's that many feet for us and includes Englewood too, so that's pretty standard. But I would like to see that increased. As to Councilmember Martinez's the relationship with the school board miscommunications, my concern for requesting any information, any emails that had gone back and forth was generated when our city manager is acting on behalf of this council, and this council does not know the issue or the catalyst for the reason he's representing all of this council to another government entity. And if there are emails out there and communication, all of this council should be given that information so that we can assess for ourselves as elected representatives whether the actions taken on this council's behalf we agree with or not. That should have been a discussion, and that should have been open information. And the pushback on that information being provided is concerning at this point. I have been told now several times that it was a miscommunication, it was a misunderstanding, but it has become apparent that several council people acted on behalf of this council, at least in the eyes of another government entity, and that information is all open, and I think it should at least be shared with the people who have to represent this community. So when our city manager is sent out to represent us, I think the information needs to be given to all the council, and I am very concerned still that that information has not been shared. I doubt that anything happened untoward or intentional, but I think it starts to become a bigger problem that we are not consistent in making sure that all council is informed with the information. So I still have requested that, and I'm very concerned about it. I don't like having school board members or other people, other elected officials having information, and I don't. Then we're blindsided by that, and that becomes then the bigger story about why we're not getting the information than what probably happened in the first place. So I would suggest that we all come on one page on what's going on here so that we can do our jobs. We need to, as a council, I would like to see it put on the agenda through what process are we as a council going to provide guidance to the supervisory committee. I've brought this up several times now. That per that contract, the supervisory committee is not an autonomous body, is representative of this council and of this community, and we have to have some kind of process that we're going to go ahead and use to provide guidance for that supervisory committee instead of what appears to be going the other way around from the supervisory committee to us. Dave Robbins, the attorney for the wastewater treatment plant, made it very clear several times, and I would advise you all to go back and listen to it again. He made it very clear several times that because of previous legal action with the wastewater treatment plant, that it is imperative that the Littleton and Englewood name remain in the name. It is not, and he made that extremely clear, and I'd like to make sure that we address that again as well. And then when is the next Tri-Cities meeting scheduled for?
Matter of fact, I just talked to Mark Relf about that. I believe it is in July. We don't have a date set yet for that.
And who's the host this time?
We believe we're going to be the host for that as well, and so.
I thought we were.
We were the host last time, weren't we?
Were we the host last time?
I think
I
so.
we were.
No.
You sure didn't try to get out of that again?
I think so.
Probably Littleton.
Well, we're glad to host. I think Littleton did.
We'll
I think it's actually Littleton's turn because I think you're
I
at
think
the
it's
golf
Littleton's
course.
turn.
But we were working.
Let me work on that.
We were working quite a bit with the CDOT issue and trying to collaborate the three cities together on several issues on the Santa Fe corridor and the Platte River as well. So I would really like to. I know that the homeless issue along the Platte and clearing out the Platte for both urban drainage, and that's going to come because we had presented to Littleton as well on that. So we need to make sure that we at least bring up those issues again and see where we're at with some of the other things we were going to partner on. Then Jennifer, member of the Inglewood Housing Authority Board, is been chosen to present to the Urban Land Institute's Shark Tank. So we're all very proud of her, and I hope that goes well. And maybe she can, maybe I can let you know how that goes after next month. I believe she's doing that this month. And then, I sent out an email to everybody, the information, the email I got from somebody on the medians, and I was driving down Broadway, and especially that south section of Broadway, we did put a lot of money in for the medians, and it's really sketchy looking on those things. It's really not a very welcoming, there's no reason to put medians in if we're not going to try and maintain them to some standard. So if we could get an update on that and what's going on, because now it's not just that it's a standard that we're trying to do, now it's just an eyesore, and we don't want to have something that we're creating that's an eyesore. And I sent everybody that copy of that gentleman's email, and when you respond back to me, I'll respond to him. I did let him know that I forwarded it on
we
to
talked
you.
about it today.
And then I've brought it up, but it's been now at least 6 months. There is graffiti on the side of the wall for the table stakes, what used to be the table stakes building, whatever it's split out now on a coma there. That is an eyesore, and you've got a business with an open patio that looks right onto that, and it's been on there for at least 6 months. And I brought it up before, but I thought maybe I should just do it more publicly because something needs to be done. I don't know whether John Cook still owns that building or not, but everybody's got to play by the same rules. And if it's he either has to take care of it, or the city has to do something about that, because that's absolutely just so difficult for those businesses down there when something like that happens like that. It's huge. It's just freaking huge. Bob had his Bob's Brew on Broadway had its 5-year anniversary this weekend. They were celebrating, and it was absolutely amazing. They had a really nice band in there. My son and I went in there and congratulated them, and they were having a really good crowd and nice music, and it was a really fun time on Saturday night, so we stopped in there for a little bit. And I wanted to know what we were going to do about the boards and commissions representation for liaisons for our new member, whether we had made a decision on whether we were all going to try and do something, or whether you'd like to ease into it a little bit more, or how we were going to do that, because I know Councilmember Cuesta said that he was open for the Parks and Rec Board, and I would be interested in doing that, except for I don't want to take something if somebody else is or interested when I already have other things. So
I was going to talk about that.
Okay, so then I guess we'll get to that. But I don't want it to be. I don't want you working extra evenings to be.
No,
No,
we can definitely talk about it.
And no, I just want. I know she brought it up before you got on to make sure. I just wanted to make sure that we remembered, and that was okay. And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
All right. For the sake of time, I think I won't talk about the other things, but I will jump into the board and commissions. I think we only had 2 people say they didn't want to be on. I cannot be on the library board anymore. Tuesday night has never really worked well. We swapped. Parks and Rec, you did suggest that you didn't want to be on that. It didn't work for you either. You did not receive any other.
Actually, I received 3.
Oh, 3.
And what I was going to do, Mayor, this is on the agenda for next week at the study session.
It is, but I'm worried about some meetings not having anybody. I just wanted that to be clear that there might be some that are going to go unliaisoned in the next week or 2. I'm not so worried about it, but I think Parks and Rec is one right this week.
I've been able. If I'm not there, I've been able to find somebody to sit in for me.
Okay.
Are you still wanting to do it? Because I would like first crack at that if you're not wanting to do it.
Yes, truth be told, the Tuesday library would be ideal if that was open as well. So I'd be willing to take up the Tuesday and relinquish the Thursday.
I also want to make room for Councilmember Sierra, because right now there's not a lot of openings for him to take something that's an ongoing, like every month. There's some that meet, very sporadically, and sometimes not very often at all. And so is it okay for us to come back with some opportunities and everyone re-examine again? Councilmember Barentine, you're on a lot. It's fine if you want to. I mean, last year you've really taken on a lot, right? And I think Councilmember Martinez is on quite a few. You were as well, but now it's changed, and so I want to make sure you've got what you want too.
Well, right, and I'm on the two that I was originally on, and I was willing to let Budget Advisory Committee go. So if someone else wanted to
When
be
were you on
that one.
Budget Advisory? That's not you.
She
Yeah,
does
they're
cover
co.
back. Yeah.
Oh.
There are two. Remember when-
So if we could, we were.
Well, I'll pass that out again.
Okay,
I think
great.
I emailed that out to you, but I'll include that into the materials for next week.
This has who's what.
Yeah, so take a look at that.
And it's got to fit his schedule, too. We can't
Right.
just go
No, that's
If
right.
I
So,
have time, I can make
here you
it.
go.
so could I ask that you each do this? Would you look at what you're assigned to? Tell us whether or not it continues to work. If someone really can't fit some things in, would you be willing to give one up? Which one would it be? And then let's send those all to Manager Keck.
Right, and you
Right.
have mine. I could do
I have
that if I
yours.
still.
Okay.
if
Yeah.
I still need
I have
to.
yours, Mr. Cuesta's, Ms. Martinez, and yours.
Some of us did it, and let's just make sure you've been, and do that extra step. If you're willing to give one up because maybe we're making room to make sure everyone's got what they want, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So is there a Budget Advisory Committee meeting before next week?
Let me look.
I can look
I
tomorrow.
I don't believe so.
She'll be
I
there
think
anyway.
they wanted to move the date, but we haven't confirmed
Okay.
that. I think it's the 19th.
Okay.
Segue into City Manager's choice.
I only have one item, and that's to invite the council and the public to the topping out ceremony. This is typically something that's done with construction, commercial construction, where the last beam of steel or wood, whatever it is, that goes and gets erected is typically signed by folks, and then they put it up, and then they dry in the building eventually. So this is going to transpire actually next Wednesday, the 20th. The construction schedule indicates that it's going to happen between 11 and noon. So I'll pass these around so that you each can have one of these, but I believe you also received an email
Yeah, we did.
with that. So that's open to the public, too. This fly's going to carry me away.
Sorry.
So, yeah, just understand that's at the PD building next Wednesday, the 20th at 11. That's it.
Thank you. City Attorney's choice.
No report this evening.
All right. Thank you, everybody. The study session is adjourned.